I decided to sell my late husband's vintage car just days after his funeral to pay off a debt my in-laws claimed he owed. But when I popped open the glove compartment to clear out his old registration papers, I found a hidden key and a sealed flash drive that would turn my grieving process into a ruthless pursuit of justice. My name is Nora. I am 32 years old, working as a corporate compliance auditor. Standing in my living room, I realized the people comforting me over my husband's sudden death were actually trying to destroy me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever fought back against a family that mistook your grief for weakness. The clinking of crystal wine glasses and hushed murmurs filled my home. It was the reception following my husband Ryan's memorial service. He died suddenly in a car accident a week prior. Ryan had been the chief financial officer of his family's logistics firm, a company run with an iron fist by his mother Patricia. I stood near the fireplace in a black dress, accepting the endless stream of hollow condolences. I needed to breathe, but Patricia blocked my path. At 58, she wore her grief like a calculated accessory. Her tailored suit was flawless, her posture rigid, and her eyes devoid of warmth. She did not offer a hug. Instead, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded legal document, slapping it against my chest so hard I stepped back. "I need the keys to this house, Nora," she demanded, her voice carrying just enough volume to silence the guests standing nearby. I stared at the paper fluttering to the floor. "What are you talking about, Patricia? We just buried him today." She crossed her arms. "Ryan embezzled over $2 million from our company before he died. This document proves it. You are going to sign the deed of this house over to the family trust to cover the debt he left behind, or I will throw you out on the street." The room went silent. Dozens of eyes burned into my back. My heart pounded against my ribs. As a compliance auditor, my career revolved around catching financial discrepancies, but her accusation left me paralyzed. Ryan was the most honorable man I knew. He would never steal from his family. Before I could speak, my sister-in-law, Brenda, pushed through the crowd. At 30, Brenda lived a lifestyle funded by maxed credit cards and her mother's indulgence. She scoffed, looking me up and down with disgust. "Do not act surprised," Brenda sneered. "You always were a freeloader. You pushed him to take that money so you could sit around pretending to be important with your desk job while he paid for everything." Brenda reached out and yanked the delicate gold chain around my neck. The clasp snapped, scraping my skin. "Ryan had given me that necklace on our 5th anniversary. You bought this with stolen money." Brenda spat, clutching the necklace. "You do not deserve to wear it. Everything you have belongs to us now." A surge of adrenaline cut through my grief. I snatched the necklace back. The audacity of attacking a widow in her own home ignited a fire inside my chest. I looked past Brenda and locked eyes with her husband, DeAndre. He stood near the hallway in a dark suit. DeAndre was an emergency room trauma doctor, a brilliant African-American man who worked grueling 80-hour weeks. He looked uncomfortable with his wife's behavior, shifting his weight and looking at the floor. I knew DeAndre was a good man blind to the toxic reality of the family he married into. I turned my attention back to Patricia. I picked up the legal demand and skimmed the first paragraph. It was a poorly drafted notice of intent to collect a corporate debt, lacking any official court seal. "You are not getting my house, Patricia," I said, my voice eerily calm, despite the trembling in my hands. "This house is in my name, and I will not let you bully me out of it." Patricia let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You think you have a choice? We have corporate lawyers drafting the asset seizure. You cannot afford to fight us, Nora. You do not have the resources. You are going to pay back every single penny my son stole, starting with the property." I knew she was bluffing about the legality, but I also knew Patricia had the money to tie me up in litigation for years. I needed liquid cash to hire my own legal representation and protect my home from whatever fraudulent liens they planned to file. Ryan spent 3 years restoring a classic Ford Mustang. It was his pride and joy, sitting under a tarp in our garage. I planned to keep it forever, but standing there surrounded by his vultures of a family, my priorities shifted with brutal clarity. "I will pay whatever fabricated debt you think he owes," I declared, locking eyes with Patricia. "But I am not giving you my home." Ryan left me his restored Mustang. It is worth enough to cover your demands while my lawyers review your ridiculous claims. Once I sell it, I will hand you a check, and then I never want to see your faces again. Get out." Patricia's eyes narrowed, but a triumphant smirk played on her lips. She thought she had won. She motioned for Brenda to follow her, and the two of them marched out the front door without another word. The rest of the guests, sensing the hostility, quickly muttered their goodbyes and filed out, leaving me entirely alone in the suffocating silence of my living room. I locked the front door, my chest heaving as the adrenaline began to fade. I could not stay in that room surrounded by the ghost of the funeral reception. I needed to act. I turned on my heel and walked straight into the garage. The air was cold, smelling faintly of motor oil and old leather. I pulled the canvas tarp off the gleaming black Mustang. I decided right then to clean out the car, list it for sale by morning, and wash my hands of Patricia and Brenda forever. I opened the passenger door and slid into the leather seat, reaching for the glove compartment to gather Ryan's registration papers. My fingers barely brushed the cold metal of the glove compartment latch when the heavy wooden door connecting the house to the garage slammed violently against the drywall. The sharp, aggressive click of designer heels echoed across the concrete floor like gunfire. I jerked my hand back, startled, as Brenda marched into the dimly lit space. She had not left with Patricia after all. She had stayed behind to ensure the knife was twisted as deeply as possible. Brenda crossed her arms, staring at the vintage Mustang with undisguised contempt. "You actually think selling this piece of junk makes you some kind of martyr, Nora? It is absolutely pathetic." I stepped out of the car, slamming the passenger door shut. The loud thud reverberated through the garage. "Get out of my house, Brenda. I already told your mother I would pay whatever fake debt you claim Ryan owes. You have no right to be in here." Brenda let out a sharp, mocking laugh that sounded entirely too loud in the enclosed space. "Your house? That is hilarious. You have been playing house with our family money since the day Ryan made the miserable mistake of marrying you. Do not act like you earned any of this. You were just a low-level desk clerk when he found you, a desperate charity case, and now you are trying to act like a grieving widow." I clenched my fists, my fingernails digging into my palms until it hurt. "Ryan loved me. We built this life together. You and Patricia are vultures swooping in before his grave is even covered." Brenda stepped closer, invading my personal space. Her breath smelled of expensive champagne and bitter entitlement. "Ryan did not love you, Nora. He was suffocating. Do you know why he was driving so fast the night he crashed? He was desperate to get away from you. You were so boring, so obsessed with your little compliance audits and your strict rules. You drove him to embezzle that money. He needed an escape from the suffocating, mundane life you forced him into." The cruelty of her words felt like a physical blow to my chest. For a moment, the air left my lungs completely. Gaslighting was Brenda's favorite weapon, a psychological skill she learned directly from Patricia. They always knew how to locate a person's deepest insecurity and weaponize it instantly. I had spent the last week agonizing over Ryan's fatal crash, wondering if he was stressed, wondering if I had missed subtle signs of distress. Brenda was taking my darkest, most private fears and serving them back to me as undisputed facts. "You are lying," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to remain steady. "Ryan and I were happy." "Happy?" Brenda scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "He was miserable. He took that $2 million because he was planning to leave you. He was going to take the money and start a new life, far away from your obsessive auditing and your mediocre background. You dragged him down, Nora. He settled for you because you were easy to control, but he finally woke up. The only tragedy here is that he died before he could finalize the divorce." Tears blurred my vision, hot and stinging. I wanted to scream, to physically throw her out of my home. But the auditor inside my brain, the analytical side that Ryan always admired, caught something very strange in Brenda's frantic attack. She was breathing heavily, her eyes darting nervously toward the Mustang. Why was she so agitated? If Patricia already had a corporate legal team drafting documents to seize my assets, why was Brenda standing in my cold garage trying to break me down psychologically? She was desperate. She wanted me to hand over the keys right now, tonight. Before I could challenge her flawed logic, the garage door opened again. DeAndre stepped into the space, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. He looked utterly exhausted. I was still wearing the dark suit from the funeral, but I knew he had come straight from an 18-hour shift at the hospital trauma center. "Brenda, enough," DeAndre said, his deep voice cutting through the heavy tension. His tone was firm, but weary, the sound of a man who spent his life mitigating disasters both at work and at home. "Leave her alone. She just buried her husband. We are going home." Brenda spun around, her face twisting into an ugly sneer. "Do not tell me what to do, DeAndre. This does not concern you. This is family business. You are in her garage, harassing her on the day of a funeral." DeAndre countered, stepping between us protectively. "Have some basic human decency." Brenda poked him hard in the chest. "You do not get to lecture me about decency. You married into this family, which means you enjoy the lifestyle my family provides. So go wait in the car and keep your mouth shut while I handle the woman who bankrupted my brother." I watched the muscle in DeAndre's jaw clench tightly. The blatant disrespect she showed her own husband was sickening. DeAndre was a brilliant life-saving physician, yet Brenda treated him like a minor inconvenience, who existed only to fund her shopping sprees when her mother cut her off. He looked at me, his dark eyes communicating a silent, profound apology for his wife's monstrous behavior. He did not argue further. He simply grabbed Brenda by the arm, ignoring her shrill protests, and physically guided her out of the garage. "Let go of me. I am not done with her," Brenda shrieked as DeAndre pulled her through the doorway. "You are going to regret this, Nora. We are taking everything." The heavy wooden door slammed shut, cutting off her vicious threats. The sudden silence in the garage was deafening. I stood frozen on the concrete floor, my chest heaving, the echo of Brenda's words ringing in my ears. She said Ryan hated me. She said he wanted to leave me. The gaslighting was so intense, so venomous, that for a split second I questioned my entire marriage. I walked over to the keypad and hit the button to close the main garage door, sealing myself inside. Then I engaged the deadbolt on the door leading to the house. I was completely alone. The adrenaline vanished, leaving behind a crushing, suffocating wave of grief. I slid down on the side of the Mustang, my back pressing against the cool metal door until I hit the floor. I pulled my knees to my chest and finally let myself cry. I sobbed for the husband I had lost, for the unfairness of his sudden death, and for the sheer cruelty of the people I had called family for the past 7 years. They did not just want my house, they wanted to destroy my sanity entirely. I sat on the cold concrete for what felt like hours, letting the tears empty me out. But as the crying subsided, the logical, meticulous part of my brain took over. I was a corporate compliance auditor. I hunted for discrepancies in multi-million-dollar ledgers for a living. Brenda's desperation did not match a family that had airtight legal backing. If they had solid proof Ryan stole the money, they would not need to bully me in a garage. They were terrified of something. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and stood up. The garage air was freezing, but my mind was incredibly clear. I grabbed a microfiber cloth and a bottle of cleaner from the shelf. If I was going to sell this car to fight them in court, it needed to be spotless. I started wiping down the leather seats. The familiar scent of Ryan's cologne clinging to the upholstery, breaking my heart all over again. I moved to the passenger side, running the cloth over the dark dashboard. I took a deep, steadying breath, reached out and pulled the latch to the glove compartment, preparing to gather the registration papers and finally see what they were hiding. The metal latch of the glove box clicked open under my fingers, the interior light flickering. I pulled out a stack of folded napkins, an old tire pressure gauge, and the owner manual. My hands shook slightly as I sifted through the mundane clutter, expecting to find the standard registration and insurance cards. The paperwork was there, tucked neatly inside a plastic sleeve, but as I pulled it out, something heavy clattered to the floor mat. I bent down and picked up a thick, strangely shaped brass key. It had no identifying markings, no keychain, and it certainly did not belong to the ignition or our house. My analytical mind kicked into high gear. Ryan was meticulous. He never kept loose, unidentified objects rattling around his restored vehicles. I flipped the owner manual over and noticed a faint square of sticky residue on the back cover, exactly the size of the key head. He had taped it there, deliberately hiding it in plain sight. I gripped the brass key, the cold metal pressing into my palm. A memory hit me with the force of a physical strike. 4 months ago, Ryan had spent 3 consecutive weekends locked in this garage covered in grease, obsessing over the Mustang rear chassis. When I had brought him dinner one night, he abruptly slammed the trunk shut, his body blocking my view of the interior. He claimed he was having trouble with the spare tire mounting bracket. But Ryan was a perfectionist who loved showing off his handiwork. Hiding a project from me was entirely out of character. I stepped back from the passenger door and walked toward the rear of the car. The garage was freezing, but a nervous heat prickled along my neck. I pressed my thumb against the chrome trunk lock and turned the main car key. The heavy lid popped open with a smooth mechanical sigh. Inside the trunk was immaculate, lined with custom black carpeting Ryan had installed himself. A full-size spare tire sat secured in the center, bolted tightly to the floorboard. I leaned in, running my hands over the pristine fabric. Everything looked completely normal. But I spent my professional life finding the truth buried beneath perfectly presented surfaces. When a multi-million-dollar corporation tried to hide offshore accounts, they always made their front-facing ledgers look flawless. Ryan had applied that exact same financial camouflage to this vehicle. I grabbed a tape measure from the workbench against the wall. I measured the interior depth of the trunk from the lip to the carpeted floor, then stepped outside the car and measured the exterior depth from the bumper to the chassis base. My pulse accelerated. There was a discrepancy. The interior trunk floor was nearly 4 inches shallower than the exterior dimensions dictated. The space beneath the carpet was not solid metal, it was hollow. I tossed the tape measure aside and climbed into the trunk, my knees pressing into the carpet, ruining my expensive black funeral dress. I reached for the heavy lug wrench secured next to the spare tire and began twisting the central mounting bolt. My muscles ached from the physical exertion and the sheer exhaustion of the day, but adrenaline fueled my movements. With a loud metallic groan, the bolt gave way. I shoved the heavy spare tire out of the trunk, letting it bounce onto the concrete garage floor. Beneath the tire sat a flat circular piece of galvanized steel that blended perfectly with the surrounding chassis. I tapped the steel plate with the heavy end of the lug wrench. A sharp, echoing thud rang out. It was completely hollow underneath. I ran my fingers along the edge of the circular plate, searching for a seam or a latch, but the metal was flush against the floorboard. Ryan had welded a custom housing unit, but he would not have permanently sealed something he needed to access. I retrieved a heavy-duty flathead screwdriver and a rubber mallet from his toolbox. Positioning the flathead firmly against the microscopic gap between the circular plate and the trunk floor, I brought the mallet down hard. The first strike did nothing. I gritted my teeth, gripping the handle tighter, and swung the mallet again with all my strength. A sharp crack echoed through the garage as the screwdriver wedged itself under the steel lip. I pushed my entire body weight down on the handle, using it as a lever. The metal groaned in protest, resisting the pressure. Sweat dripped down my forehead, mixing with the dried tears on my cheeks. I shoved the handle down one more time, letting out a sharp gasp as the circular steel plate finally popped upward, revealing a hidden rectangular cavity beneath the trunk floor. My breath caught in my throat. Nestled inside the dark custom-built compartment was a heavy-gauge steel lockbox. It was bolted directly into the car frame, making it impossible to remove by force. The front of the box featured a single old-fashioned brass keyhole. My hands were shaking so violently, I had to grip my right wrist with my left hand to steady myself. I pulled the heavy brass key from my pocket. I lowered myself further into the trunk, hovering over the hidden compartment. I slid the key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, a perfect fit. I turned the key to the right. A heavy, satisfying mechanical click echoed in the silent garage. I hooked my fingers under the heavy lid of the lockbox and pulled it open. Inside lay a thick leather-bound ledger book and a high-capacity encrypted flash drive tightly wrapped in black electrical tape. I reached out and touched the worn cover of the ledger, feeling the cold weight of the undeniable truth resting right beneath my fingertips. I knew exactly what this was. Ryan had not just hidden stolen money. He kept all the actual receipts, leaving behind the absolute perfect weapon designed for me. I pulled the heavy leather-bound ledger from the cold steel box. The pages were dense, filled with Ryan's neat handwriting alongside printed transaction hashes. I set it on the passenger seat and reached for the encrypted flash drive wrapped in black electrical tape. I needed my laptop immediately. I climbed out of the trunk legs, shaking, and sprinted into the house. Grabbing my work laptop from the dining table, I ignored the lingering scent of stale funeral catering and ran back into the locked garage. I sat in the driver's seat of the Mustang, plugged the flash drive into the USB port, and stared at the security prompt demanding a password. Ryan and I never used predictable names for passwords. We used the exact coordinates of the mountain overlook where he proposed. I typed the numbers with trembling fingers. The progress bar loaded, instantly granting me access to a master directory. As a corporate compliance auditor, I spend my life hunting for financial irregularities that executives try to bury. What I saw populating on that screen made my blood run cold. It was a terrifying labyrinth of shell companies, dummy vendor accounts, and offshore wire transfers. Patricia was not just running a regional logistics firm. She was operating a highly sophisticated multi-million-dollar money laundering syndicate. I opened the master spreadsheet. The family logistics company was billing for massive freight shipments that never existed, funneling millions through phantom suppliers based in the Cayman Islands. But the true horror lay in the secondary tab. Brenda had her own designated column. Patricia had authorized over $4 million to be funneled directly into an LLC registered under Brenda's maiden name. My sister-in-law was not just spending her mother's money on luxury vacations. She was a complicit director in a federal crime hiding stolen funds as a highly paid ghost consultant. I flipped open the physical ledger cross-referencing the digital data with Ryan's handwritten notes. Ryan had been tracking every single fraudulent transfer for 4 years. Beside a staggering $8 million discrepancy, Ryan had written a frantic note in red ink. Patricia forcing signatures on hospital supply contracts, using DeAndre's credentials. My stomach bottomed out. Patricia and Brenda were using DeAndre's position as an emergency room physician to secure fake medical supply contracts, laundering dirty cartel cash through the very hospital that employed him. DeAndre had absolutely no idea his medical license and digital footprint were being weaponized. If federal authorities found this without context, DeAndre would take the hardest fall. He would lose his medical license and face decades in federal prison for a crime his wife and mother-in-law orchestrated behind his back. I scrolled deeper into the flash drive, finding scanned copies of forged board resolutions. Patricia had deliberately altered the corporate structure 6 months ago, removing herself as the primary financial guarantor and replacing her name with Ryan's. She had designated her own son as the ultimate fall guy. The $2 million Patricia demanded from me tonight was not a debt Ryan owed. It was a fractional drop in the bucket, a theatrical distraction. They needed me to surrender my house and assets immediately to legitimize the narrative that Ryan was a rogue embezzler who ruined his family. If they could seize my property and declare Ryan the sole thief, federal investigators would stop digging, completely missing the $50 million laundering operation Patricia actually ran. Then I found the audio file buried in a hidden subfolder marked urgent. I clicked play, the sound echoing through the Mustang speakers. It was a recorded argument between Ryan and Patricia, dated just 3 days before his fatal car crash. "You are going to prison for this, Mom." Ryan's voice rang out tight with panic and rage. "I am not letting you pin this medical supply fraud on DeAndre, and I am certainly not letting you drag Nora into this mess. I have the ledger. I am going to the FBI on Monday morning." Patricia's response was chillingly calm, utterly lacking maternal warmth. "You always were too weak, Ryan. If you step foot in a federal building, Nora will suffer severe consequences. I will freeze every account she has, and I will make sure she takes the blame for the offshore accounts. Hand over the ledger right now." Never. Ryan shot back. The audio cut out with a violent click. He never made it to the FBI. 3 days later, his brakes supposedly failed on a winding mountain road. The local police ruled it a tragic accident. Listening to that recording, the devastating reality crashed down on me. Ryan's death was not a tragedy caused by bad luck or slippery roads. It was a calculated assassination. Patricia had her own son murdered to protect her criminal empire, and now she was coming for me to tie up the final loose end. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. The overwhelming grief that had consumed me all week instantly crystallized into absolute blinding rage. They thought I was just a naive, grieving widow they could bully into submission. They thought my compliance auditing job was just boring desk work. They had no idea they had just handed a master key to a woman who dismantled fraudulent corporations for a living. I was going to use every piece of evidence in this trunk to burn their entire lives to the ground. I carefully removed the flash drive, slipping it securely into my dress, and grabbed the heavy leather ledger. I needed to get this evidence out of the house immediately before they could fabricate another legal demand. I reached for the door handle to step out of the car. Suddenly, a thunderous, violent pounding rattled the heavy wooden door connecting the garage to the house. The noise was so explosive I dropped the laptop onto the passenger seat. Someone was throwing their entire body weight against the wood, kicking and slamming against the deadbolt I had locked earlier. The door frame groaned under the immense pressure. "Open this door right now, Nora!" Patricia's voice shrieked from the other side, stripped of all her refined upper-class pretense. The sound was feral, desperate, and filled with lethal intent. "We know you are in there. Open the door and give us the keys to that car." A second later, Brenda's voice joined the assault, her fists hammering against the wood in a frantic, unhinged rhythm. "Break it down, Mom. She is probably trying to drive it away. You are not taking what belongs to us, you thief. Give us the keys to the Mustang right now, or we will smash the windows and drag you out." They had returned. They knew the evidence was hidden inside this vehicle, and they were willing to tear down my house tonight to get it. The pounding on the door connecting the house to the garage grew louder, the heavy wood splintering around the steel hinges. Patricia and Brenda were inside my home. They had bypassed the front door lock, likely using a spare key Ryan had given them years ago. I had mere seconds before they broke through the deadbolt. I shoved the heavy leather ledger under my arm, grabbed my work laptop from the passenger seat, and clutched the encrypted flash drive tightly in my fist. I slipped out of the Mustang, closing the door with absolute silence. I could not use the main electronic garage door because the motor was too slow and incredibly loud. Instead, I sprinted toward the narrow exterior side door that led directly out to the back alleyway. I twisted the deadbolt, shoved the heavy metal door open, and plunged into the freezing winter night. I heard the sickening crack of the interior door frame giving way behind me. Patricia and Brenda had breached the garage. I pulled the side door shut, locked it from the outside with my spare key, and ran down the darkened alley. I sprinted for 3 blocks, my lungs burning in the frigid air, until I reached a 24-hour diner nestled on the corner of a busy commercial intersection. I slid into a cracked vinyl booth at the very back of the restaurant, completely hidden from the street windows. A tired waitress poured me a cup of black coffee and walked away without a word. I opened my laptop, ignoring my shivering hands, and plugged in the flash drive. The diner provided an unsecured wireless network, but I immediately routed my connection through a heavy virtual private network. As a corporate compliance auditor, my entire career was built on untangling financial webs without leaving a digital footprint. Patricia thought she was a mastermind, but her operation was sloppy compared to the transnational corporate frauds I dismantled for a living. I opened Ryan's master spreadsheet. The layout was chaotic, filled with panic and disorganized data entry. Ryan was a brilliant financial officer, but he lacked aggressive forensic training. He had collected raw data. I needed to synthesize it into a lethal weapon. I launched my proprietary auditing software, a specialized program designed to cross-reference offshore routing numbers with public tax databases and shell company registries. I imported the raw data from the flash drive and initiated the sequence. The software immediately began mapping the flow of dirty money. Patricia had established a complex, multi-layered network of dummy corporations. She was billing the family logistics company for massive ghost shipments, authorizing exorbitant payouts to non-existent freight carriers. The software traced those payouts directly to 3 offshore accounts based in the Cayman Islands. But the money did not stay hidden there. Patricia was actively routing the laundered funds back into the United States through fabricated medical equipment invoices. I zoomed in on the medical supply chain data. The invoices were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were being paid out weekly for highly specialized surgical equipment and emergency room supplies that never actually existed. I clicked on the authorization signatures. The buyer on every single invoice was DeAndre. His digital signature, his medical license number, and his specific hospital procurement credentials were stamped across every fraudulent purchase order. Patricia and Brenda were using his impeccable reputation as a prominent African-American trauma surgeon to bypass rigorous hospital procurement audits. They were turning a dedicated healer into a high-level money launderer. If federal authorities caught wind of this anomaly without context, DeAndre would be the primary target. He would lose his medical license and face decades in federal prison for a crime his wife and mother-in-law orchestrated completely behind his back. I needed to secure these files on an external encrypted cloud server immediately. If they somehow tracked my location and stole my laptop, I needed a backup that could trigger automatically. I navigated to a secure cloud hosting service based in Switzerland, planning to buy a terabyte of anonymous storage. I entered my primary credit card information and hit the submit button. The screen flashed a bright red error message. Transaction declined. I frowned. That credit card had a massive limit and a zero balance just yesterday, assuming it was a fraud alert due to the overseas transaction. I pulled out my wallet and entered the details of my secondary emergency credit card. Transaction declined. Panic gripped my throat. I pulled out my phone and logged into my banking application. The loading screen spun for a fraction of a second before displaying my financial dashboard. My checking account showed a balance of exactly $0. My personal savings account was completely empty. My joint investment portfolio with Ryan was locked. A notification banner appeared at the very top of the screen in bold red text. Account frozen due to emergency legal injunction regarding the estate of the deceased. Please contact the fraud department immediately. Patricia had not just filed a fake legal demand. She had weaponized the probate court system against me by presenting her forged documents claiming Ryan embezzled company funds. She had convinced a corrupt judge or a panicked bank official to freeze all my marital and personal assets pending an official investigation. She had effectively severed my financial lifelines in a matter of hours. I was sitting in a diner at 2 a.m, holding the most explosive evidence of federal crimes. And I could not even afford to pay for the cup of black coffee sitting on my table. My phone vibrated violently against the laminate tabletop. A text message popped up on the screen. It was from Patricia. The message was short and dripping with absolute malice. We broke into the garage. The trunk is empty. Your bank accounts are frozen, Nora. You have no money, no car, and nowhere to run. Bring the ledger and the flash drive back to the house within the hour, or I will call the police and tell them you stole $2 million from your dead husband. You cannot win this fight. I stared at the glowing screen. Patricia thought starving me of resources would force my surrender. She thought cutting off my money would break my spirit and send me crawling back to her. She severely underestimated the resolve of a woman who had just realized her husband was murdered by his own mother to protect a criminal syndicate. I did not need my bank accounts to destroy her. I needed a staging ground, and I needed an inside man. I needed the one person who had just as much to lose as I did. I closed out the banking application, pulled up my contact list, and dialed DeAndre's private cell phone number. 10 miles across the city, the harsh fluorescent lights of Memorial Hospital Trauma Center glared down on DeAndre. He scrubbed the dried blood from his forearms, the coarse antibacterial soap scraping against his dark skin. At 34 years old, he was the youngest attending emergency room physician on staff. He had just spent the last 6 hours saving the life of a multi-vehicle pileup victim operating on pure adrenaline and black coffee. He dried his hands with a rough paper towel and walked out into the chaotic nurse station, desperate for a moment of quiet. A charge nurse approached him with a clipboard, looking deeply apologetic. The hospital administration is pushing back on the emergency airlift for the pediatric patient in bed 4, she said, keeping her voice low. They are claiming the specialized transport helicopter is out of network, and the parents cannot provide the $5,000 upfront copay required for non-covered flights. DeAndre clenched his jaw. He was not about to let a child suffer because of bureaucratic red tape. Do not worry about the administration billing department, he told the nurse firmly. Book the flight right now. Put the deposit on my personal account. He reached into his dark blue scrubs and pulled out his black titanium credit card. It was an exclusive account with a limit high enough to buy a small house, a perk of his lucrative medical career, and his previously pristine credit score. The nurse thanked him profusely, processed the heavy metal card through the terminal at the front desk, and waited. A sharp negative beep echoed from the machine. "Card declined," she whispered, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Let me try it again. It must be a system error on our end." She swiped it a second time. The same harsh beep sounded. DeAndre felt a strange prickle of unease at the back of his neck. He had just paid the balance in full 3 days ago. He handed her a secondary platinum card he kept strictly for emergencies. The terminal rejected that one instantly as well. DeAndre took the cards back, a cold knot forming in his stomach. "I will call the bank and sort this out. Use my hospital discretionary fund code to bypass the billing hold for now. Just get that kid on the helicopter immediately." He retreated to his small private office down the hall, closing the heavy wooden door behind him. The physical exhaustion of his 18-hour shift vanished, entirely replaced by a surging tide of anxiety. Brenda managed all their household finances. She insisted on it when they got married, claiming her business degree made her better equipped to handle their investments. DeAndre had gladly handed over the reins, too consumed by his grueling medical residency to worry about balancing checkbooks. He pulled his phone from his pocket and opened his mobile banking application. He rarely checked it, trusting Brenda implicitly to secure their future. He typed in his credentials and waited for the dashboard to load. The screen refreshed, displaying a series of numbers that made the breath leave his lungs. His primary checking account, which usually held well over $60,000 for daily expenses, showed a balance of -$400. His high-yield savings account was completely zeroed out. Panic rising, he navigated to the joint investment portfolio. Gone. Every single share had been liquidated and transferred out over the past 3 weeks. His hands began to shake as he clicked on the transaction history. The ledger was a horrifying catalog of unchecked greed and frantic theft. There were massive daily wire transfers to an obscure limited liability company registered under Brenda's maiden name. There was a recent withdrawal of $200,000 directly from their son's dedicated college fund, funneled into a luxury auto dealership to purchase a brand new Porsche. But the most devastating discovery was buried in the loan section of the application. A secondary mortgage had been taken out against their family home just 5 days ago. The loan amount was a staggering $1.5 million. DeAndre stared at the digital signature attached to the approval document. It was his own signature, perfectly forged, complete with his personal medical identification number used as a secondary verification credential. Brenda had not just drained his bank accounts. She had stolen his identity, leveraged his medical credentials, and plunged him into insurmountable, crippling debt. The woman he slept next to, the mother of his child, had methodically dismantled his entire financial existence while he was busy pulling 12-hour shifts in the emergency room to provide for her. He thought back to her erratic behavior over the past few months. The whispered phone calls with Patricia that ended abruptly whenever he walked into the room. The sudden unexplained shopping sprees. The way she had vehemently opposed him hiring an independent accountant for his private practice, claiming it was a waste of money when she could do it for free. It was not a desire to help. It was a calculated strategy to maintain absolute control over the deception. DeAndre hit the speed dial for Brenda's phone. It rang 4 times before dropping directly to voicemail. He tried again. Straight to voicemail. She was screening his calls, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire financial world was collapsing around him right now. He threw the phone onto his desk, burying his face in his hands. A mixture of profound betrayal and blinding rage washed over him. He was a man who prided himself on his intelligence, on his ability to assess a crisis and execute a life-saving solution in seconds. Yet he had been entirely blind to the financial hemorrhage happening inside his own home. He had to contact his bank fraud department. He had to freeze his medical license verification portal before she could use it again. He needed to find a ruthless divorce attorney immediately. As he reached for his phone to dial the bank, the screen illuminated with an incoming call. The caller identification displayed Nora's name. DeAndre stared at the screen. He had just seen Nora a few hours ago in her garage where he had physically dragged his unhinged wife away from her. He knew Brenda and Patricia were targeting Nora, demanding money, and attempting to seize her home. He had felt terrible for Nora, a grieving widow being bullied by his toxic in-laws, but he had believed it was a dispute over Ryan's alleged embezzlement. Now, looking at his decimated bank accounts, a terrifying realization struck him. Brenda and Patricia were not trying to recover stolen money from Nora. They were trying to steal from her exactly like they had just stolen from him. He snatched the phone off the desk and accepted the call. "Nora," he answered, his voice strained and tight. "DeAndre," Nora said. Her voice was completely different from the weeping, devastated woman he had left in the garage earlier tonight. It was ice-cold, sharp, and commanding. "I am sitting in a diner 3 blocks from my house. Your wife and your mother-in-law just kicked down the door connecting my garage to my living room. They are trying to steal the evidence I found in the trunk of Ryan's car." DeAndre stood up, his medical chart sliding off his lap onto the floor. "Evidence of what?" "Evidence that Patricia is running a $50 million money laundering syndicate," Nora stated flatly. "And DeAndre, she is using your medical license and your hospital procurement credentials to authorize fake medical supply purchases. They are setting you up to take the fall for federal fraud." The walls of the small office seemed to close in on him. The forged second mortgage, the empty bank accounts, the declined credit card. It all suddenly locked into a horrifying, cohesive picture. "Where are you right now?" DeAndre asked, grabbing his car keys from his desk drawer. "Tell me exactly where you are." "I am coming to you." "I am at the Midnight Diner on 4th and Elm," I replied. "Park in the back alley by the delivery entrance. Do not pull into the main lot." If Patricia managed to clone Ryan's phone tracking software to mine, she already sent someone to find me. I ended the call immediately. I turned back to my laptop screen, the harsh light reflecting off the cracked vinyl table. I needed physical copies of the most damning evidence. If my laptop battery died, or if Patricia's thugs smashed it, DeAndre needed to walk out of this diner holding the undeniable truth in his hands. I pulled a portable wireless printer from my work tote and connected it. I selected the top-tier fraudulent medical supply invoices, the forged board resolutions, and the offshore routing numbers, linking directly to Brenda. The small printer whirred to life, spitting out page after page of federal crimes. 10 minutes later, the heavy metal door swung open. DeAndre stepped inside. He was still wearing his dark blue hospital scrubs, but he looked like a man who had just survived a violent crash. His usual confident posture was gone. His shoulders were tense, his eyes wide and bloodshot, scanning the room until they locked onto my booth. He slid into the booth opposite me. He opened his mouth to speak, but I did not have time for pleasantries or mutual pity. We were actively being hunted. I took the stack of freshly printed documents and slammed them face up onto the table right in front of him. "Look at the 3rd page," I ordered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Look at the authorizing signature on the hospital procurement forms." DeAndre stared down at the paper. The remaining color drained entirely from his face. His large hands, the same hands that performed delicate trauma surgeries every single day, began to tremble. He picked up the page, bringing it closer to his eyes. "This is my medical license number," DeAndre said, his voice cracking. "This is my digital procurement authorization code. But I never signed this. I have never heard of this vendor." "Because the vendor does not exist," I stated coldly. "Patricia is using the logistics company to bill for phantom freight, and Brenda is using your hospital credentials to authorize payments for non-existent surgical equipment. They are washing dirty money through your medical practice. They have processed over $12 million through your name in the last 8 months alone." DeAndre dropped the paper as if it had physically burned him. He dragged both hands down his face, a raw groan escaping his chest. "They drained my accounts," he confessed. "Every single credit card I own was declined an hour ago. Brenda liquidated our joint investment portfolio. She emptied my savings. She even drained my son's college fund to buy a luxury sports car." I suppressed a sharp pang of empathy. Sympathy would not keep us out of federal prison. I pointed to the 4th page in the stack. "It gets worse, DeAndre. Look at the property records. He flipped the page. His eyes scanned the document, and a fresh wave of horror washed over his features. A second mortgage, he whispered, completely paralyzed by the revelation. A $1.5 million loan taken out against my house just 5 days ago. With your forged signature, I added ruthlessly. Patricia and Brenda are not just bleeding you dry. They are meticulously building a financial cage around you. When the FBI finally flags this money laundering syndicate, Patricia will hand them this exact paper trail. She will paint you as a rogue high-earning doctor with secret debt, using his wealthy mother-in-law's logistics firm to clean his stolen money. DeAndre gripped the edge of the table. "Why me?" he asked, his voice shaking with rising fury. "Why would Brenda do this to the father of her child?" "Because you are the absolute perfect shield," I explained, looking him dead in the eye. "You are a highly respected African-American trauma surgeon at one of the most prestigious hospitals in the state. Patricia knows that systemic biases in the justice system will work against you if you are framed for a massive white-collar crime. Your impeccable reputation provides the ultimate cover, but your demographic makes you the easiest target to throw under the bus. You were never her husband, DeAndre. You were her insurance policy." The brutal truth settled over the table. I watched the last remnants of the loving husband die inside DeAndre's eyes. The grief vanished instantly, replaced by cold, calculating determination. The brilliant surgeon was back, and he was ready to operate. "Ryan figured it out, did he not?" DeAndre asked, his tone devoid of emotion. "That is why they killed him. He found out they were framing me and he tried to stop them." I nodded, sliding the flash drive across the table. He hid this drive in the master physical ledger in his Mustang. "Patricia and Brenda just broke into my garage trying to steal it back. They froze my bank accounts to starve me out. They think I am sitting here terrified, waiting for them to finish me off." DeAndre picked up the flash drive, his jaw set like stone. He looked at me, a dangerous fire igniting in his eyes. "They think they cut off your resources," he said, his voice dropping. "But they forgot that my hospital access credentials grant me top-tier administrative clearance to the medical procurement database. If Patricia is routing phantom invoices through my hospital network, I can track every single incoming wire transfer from her logistics firm right from my office terminal. I can download the entire digital transaction history before she wipes the server." My heart raced. "That is the missing link," I said. "Ryan's ledger proves the money left Patricia's company. If you pull the hospital server logs proving the money entered the medical network under forged authorizations, we have an airtight federal case. We can lock them away for the rest of their natural lives." DeAndre stood up, sliding the printed documents and the flash drive into the deep pockets of his scrubs. The alliance between us was cemented in blood and betrayal. "I am going back to the hospital right now," he declared. "I am pulling the server logs and locking Brenda out of every electronic medical portal she attached herself to." "Where are you going to go?" I closed my laptop and packed the portable printer. "I am going to find a cheap motel that takes cash," I replied, pulling a $20 bill from my pocket to pay for the coffee. "I need to synthesize this data into a formal forensic audit report for the FBI. We meet tomorrow at noon." DeAndre nodded once, turning toward the back exit. We were no longer grieving family members. We were executioners, and the trap was officially set. DeAndre slid out of the vinyl booth, his imposing frame casting a long shadow across the diner table. Before he walked away, I reached out and grabbed his forearm. The fabric of his hospital scrubs felt rough beneath my fingers. "Listen to me," I commanded, keeping my voice steady. "You cannot show a single ounce of anger when you go home to Brenda. She is manipulative and she has been playing you for years. If she senses that you know about the second mortgage or the empty bank accounts, she will call Patricia immediately. They will wipe the hospital servers before you can even log in." DeAndre clenched his jaw, a muscle feathering under his dark skin. The reality of going back to the woman who had financially ruined him was a bitter pill to swallow. "I know how to compartmentalize trauma, Nora. I do it every day in the emergency room. I will tell Brenda the card decline was a fraud alert triggered by a security breach at the hospital. I will play the exhausted doctor perfectly." "Get the procurement server logs," I reiterated, my eyes locked on his. Download every single invoice authorized under your medical license for the past 4 years. Once you secure that data, freeze your medical credentials and contact the best divorce attorney in the city. Do not warn her. I will meet you at noon tomorrow, DeAndre affirmed. He pulled his hood up against the freezing winter air and disappeared through the back exit of the diner, blending into the shadows of the alleyway. I was completely alone again, but the suffocating grief had been entirely replaced by razor-sharp focus. I gathered my laptop, the portable printer, and the heavily guarded flash drive, slipping them into my tote bag. I left a $20 bill on the table and exited through the front doors, pulling my coat tightly around my shoulders. I walked 6 blocks through the biting wind until I found a dilapidated motel with a flickering neon vacancy sign. It was the kind of establishment that did not ask for a credit card or a matching identification card, relying strictly on cash transactions. I handed the clerk a wad of bills from my emergency stash and took the physical metal key to a room on the second floor. The room smelled of stale smoke and harsh chemical cleaners, but it had a heavy deadbolt and a chain lock. I secured the door, closed the dusty curtains tightly, and set up my workstation on the small circular table in the corner. I plugged my laptop into the wall outlet and immediately connected to my encrypted Swiss cloud server. For the next 5 hours, I did not stop typing. I utilized every advanced forensic auditing technique I had mastered over my career to dismantle Patricia's financial fortress. I took Ryan's raw data from the leather ledger and cross-referenced it with the offshore banking information I had already decrypted. I built a comprehensive timeline that mapped every single fake logistics invoice to a corresponding phantom medical supply purchase. Patricia had constructed a brilliant illusion. By moving the dirty money through a legitimate logistics firm and then cleaning it through a highly respected hospital network, she had created a closed-loop system that easily bypassed standard regulatory audits. But she had made one fatal mistake. She left behind a digital fingerprint on every transaction by using DeAndre's credentials. She assumed family loyalty, and his demanding medical schedule would keep him blind forever. I compiled the evidence into a devastatingly clear 50-page report. I categorized the federal offenses of money laundering, wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate embezzlement. This was no longer just a defensive maneuver to save my house. This was a fully weaponized whistleblower submission tailored specifically for the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. As dawn began to break, painting the sky outside my motel window in pale shades of gray, I finally hit save. The master file was secured. I rubbed my burning eyes and reached for my phone to check the time. It was exactly 6 in the morning. I opened my home security application. When Patricia and Brenda broke into the garage, I assumed they would disable the primary alarm system. However, I had secretly installed a secondary covert network of microcameras hidden in the living room bookshelves and the garage ceiling months ago when Ryan first started acting paranoid about his safety. The application connected to the live feed. What I saw on the screen made my blood turn to ice. The camera in my living room displayed a horrifying scene. Patricia was pacing across my hardwood floors, holding a large red plastic gasoline canister. She was violently splashing the toxic, highly flammable liquid across my curtains, my sofa, and the expensive area rug in the center of the room. Following closely behind her was a heavy-set man dressed in completely black clothing. He was pouring gasoline along the baseboards and the wooden staircase leading up to my master bedroom. I watched in absolute disbelief as Patricia reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a folded piece of white stationery. She walked directly toward the bookshelf where my hidden camera was embedded. She held the paper up, examining it under the dim morning light. It was a handwritten note, and even through the grainy camera feed, I could see my own forged signature at the bottom. She was planting a suicide note. Patricia had frozen my accounts and demanded the car keys as a distraction. Her real plan was to silence me permanently. By burning my house to the ground with a fake confession note, left on the front porch, she intended to frame my disappearance as the tragic suicide of a guilty, grieving widow who had embezzled millions and could not live with the shame. The fire would destroy any remaining physical evidence in the house, incinerate Ryan's old office documents, and close the federal investigation before it even began. She struck a match, The small flame illuminated her cold, calculating eyes for a fraction of a second. She tossed the match onto the gasoline-soaked rug. A massive wall of orange fire erupted, instantly swallowing the living room in a violent inferno. The intense heat overloaded the hidden camera sensor, and the live feed abruptly cut to black static. I sat frozen in the dimly lit motel room, the glow of the error message illuminating my face. Patricia had just incinerated my entire past. The home I built with Ryan, our wedding photos, every cherished memory was currently turning to ash. She wanted to erase me from existence. I slowly closed my laptop, my breathing dangerously calm. She thought fire would silence me. She had no idea it just forged me into a weapon that was about to burn her empire to the ground. I watched the black screen of my security feed for exactly 1 minute, committing the image of my burning home to memory. Patricia wanted a dead, disgraced widow. I was going to give her a ghost. I packed my laptop, the portable printer, and the encrypted flash drive into my tote bag. I left the dingy motel room before the sun fully cleared the horizon, moving like a shadow through the biting winter morning. I needed a secure location with high-speed, untraceable internet access to finalize the federal whistleblower report. I found a 24-hour internet cafe in an industrial district, paid the attendant in cash, and settled into a booth facing the exit. By 8 o'clock, my phone began vibrating continuously. I had kept it powered on strictly to monitor Patricia's inevitable media play. I opened a local news application and was immediately greeted by a breaking news banner. A massive structure fire had consumed a residential home in the affluent suburbs. The headline read, "Grieving widow suspected in arson and multi-million-dollar corporate theft." I clicked the live video link. Patricia stood in front of the smoldering remains of my house, surrounded by reporters. She wore a perfectly tailored black coat, dabbing her dry eyes with a designer handkerchief. Brenda stood right beside her, playing the role of the traumatized sister. "It breaks my heart to stand here today," Patricia told the cameras, her voice trembling with practiced devastation. "We just buried my beloved son Ryan. We thought the tragedy was over. But last night we discovered that his wife Nora had stolen $2 million from our family logistics company. When we confronted her with the evidence, she became violently unstable. She set her own house on fire to destroy the financial records and vanished into the night. We fear the guilt drove her to do something unthinkable." My jaw tightened. Patricia was brilliant. By framing me as a deranged, suicidal embezzler, she preemptively discredited any financial evidence I might try to bring forward. If I went to the police now, I would be arrested for arson and corporate theft before I could even open my mouth. The smear campaign escalated with terrifying speed. Brenda had taken to social media, unleashing a coordinated attack across every platform. She posted fabricated screenshots of aggressive text messages supposedly sent by me, painting me as a greedy, unhinged woman who hated her husband. Within an hour, my professional reputation was completely annihilated. I opened my work email to find a formal termination notice from the senior partners at my compliance auditing firm. The email stated that my alleged criminal actions violated their strict moral turpitude clause. My corporate access was revoked. My social standing was obliterated. I was officially a fugitive with no job, no home, and no money. I smiled. It was the most liberated I had ever felt. At exactly noon, I walked into the subterranean parking garage of the downtown public library, our agreed meeting spot. DeAndre was already there, leaning against the concrete pillar next to his SUV. He wore a heavy wool coat over his scrubs, holding a thick manila envelope tightly against his chest. When he saw me step out of the shadows, the tension in his shoulders dropped instantly, replaced by a fierce, burning anger. "I saw the news broadcast," DeAndre said, his voice echoing in the empty concrete structure. He pushed off the pillar and walked toward me. "They burned down your house, Nora. They are telling the entire city you are an arsonist and a thief. My hospital administrator pulled me into his office this morning asking if I knew anything about your psychological state. Brenda has been calling my colleagues, spreading rumors that you lost your mind. We need to go to the police right now. I have the server logs." I held up my hand, stopping him in his tracks. "No police," I ordered firmly. "The local authorities are completely useless against a syndicate this size." Patricia has likely already bribed someone in the precinct to flag my name. If we walk into a police station, I get arrested and they bury your evidence in an evidence locker forever. DeAndre gripped the manila envelope so hard the paper crumpled. So what do we do? Let them destroy you. Let Brenda keep draining my son's future. We let them think they have already won, I said, leaning against the cold concrete wall. Look at their strategy, DeAndre. Patricia burned my house down because she is terrified, but her media performance projects absolute invincibility. She thinks I am either dead in the ashes or running for my life. We need to feed that delusion. I need Patricia and Brenda to feel so untouchable that they proceed with their ultimate money laundering event. I pulled my laptop from my tote bag and balanced it on the hood of his SUV. I opened the offshore banking matrix I had decrypted earlier. I pointed to a massive pending transaction scheduled for this coming Saturday. Every year, Patricia hosts the Foundation Logistics Charity Gala. I explained, tracing the digital route on the screen. It is her biggest public relations event, attended by every major political figure, investor, and hospital administrator in the state. According to Ryan's ledger, she uses the gala donations to wash a massive lump sum of dirty cartel money. She mixes the illegal cash with the legitimate charity checks, cleanses it through the foundation, and routes it straight into her Cayman accounts. DeAndre stared at the screen, his sharp medical mind instantly grasping the magnitude of the trap. If she thinks you are neutralized, she will not delay the transfer, he concluded. She will execute the transaction exactly as planned on Saturday night. Exactly, I confirmed, shutting the laptop. I am leaning entirely into this defeat. I will not release a single public statement defending myself. I will let them drag my name through the mud all week long. Let them bask in the glory of their fake victimhood. We are going to let them stand on that stage in front of the city elite believing they are gods. And then we are going to drop the federal guillotine on their necks. DeAndre handed me the thick manila envelope containing the hospital procurement server logs. Every fake medical invoice is in there, he said, his voice dropping to a lethal, determined register. It proves Brenda used my credentials to authorize over $12 million in phantom supplies. It links directly to Patricia's logistics firm. I secured the envelope inside my bag. We have the weapon, DeAndre. Now we just wait for the execution. DeAndre turned away from my car and walked to his own vehicle. His heavy boots echoed against the concrete as he left the library parking garage. The drive back to his upscale suburban neighborhood felt like navigating a foreign country. The streets were identical, the houses just as grand, but the reality behind the manicured lawns had shattered. He pulled his SUV into the driveway of the massive brick estate he thought he owned. The financial documents I had given him burned a hole in his coat pocket. He pulled out his phone and opened a family location tracking application Brenda insisted they install last year. She claimed it was for safety, but he now realized it was to monitor his grueling hospital hours. Her icon blinked steadily at a luxury shopping plaza downtown. She was currently burning through the stolen money, likely celebrating my supposed demise. DeAndre unlocked the front door and stepped into the silent foyer. The house felt entirely different now. It was not a home. It was a crime scene paid for by phantom medical supplies and forged signatures. He bypassed the kitchen and walked straight down the hallway toward Brenda's private home office. She had installed a digital keypad on the solid oak door 2 months ago, claiming she needed strict privacy for her consulting work. That consulting work was actually a federal money laundering operation. He stared at the keypad. He knew Brenda was arrogant, but she was also a creature of habit. He thought back to the security codes she used for their home alarm system and her personal laptop before she locked him out. He tried their wedding anniversary. A harsh red light flashed, indicating an incorrect entry. He tried their son's birthday. Another red flash. He took a steadying breath, channeling the same hyper-focused calm he used when stabilizing trauma patients in the emergency room. He looked closely at the keypad under the hallway lighting. Expensive manicured fingernails. He rearranged the numbers in his head. 1479. It was the exact dollar amount of the first major contract her mother landed years ago, a number Patricia constantly boasted about at family dinners. He punched in the code. A soft green light illuminated the panel and the heavy bolt clicked open. DeAndre pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was immaculate, decorated in stark white and gold. He walked directly to her sleek desktop computer and hit the power button. The screen demanded a password. He pulled a specialized decryption drive from his pocket. He had borrowed it from a trusted friend in the hospital information technology department, under the guise of recovering a locked medical file. He inserted the drive into the USB port and executed the bypass program. Lines of code cascaded down the screen for 2 agonizing minutes before the desktop finally unlocked, granting him unrestricted access to the brain of her operation. He immediately opened her primary document directory. The folders were meticulously organized. He clicked on a file labeled Foundation Logistics Charity Gala. Inside, he found the exact wire transfer schedules I had warned him about. Patricia had mapped out the entire transaction down to the minute. On Saturday night, precisely at 9 o'clock during the gala keynote speech, $8 million in dirty cash would be mixed with the charity donations and electronically routed to the Cayman Islands. He inserted his own high-capacity encrypted flash drive and initiated the mass download. A progress bar appeared on the screen estimating 5 minutes to completion. While the files transferred, DeAndre opened a secondary folder that caught his eye. It was labeled Personal Asset Management. He clicked the mouse, his chest tightening as a series of PDF documents populated the screen. The first document was a life insurance policy adjustment. He opened the file and read the terms. His heart slammed violently against his ribs. 3 days ago, Brenda had drastically increased the payout on his life insurance policy. The new death benefit was $10 million. The policy included a specific clause that guaranteed immediate payout in the event of a fatal motor vehicle collision. The exact same cause of death that had suddenly claimed Ryan's life just weeks prior. DeAndre gripped the edge of the glass desk, a wave of profound nausea washing over him. Brenda and Patricia were not just framing him for medical fraud. They had already calculated his expiration date. Once the gala transfer was complete and the money was securely hidden offshore, they planned to silence him permanently in a staged car crash, pocketing $10 million while letting a dead man take the blame for the federal crimes. He was looking at his own execution order. The progress bar on the screen hit 70%. Suddenly, the low rumble of a luxury sports car engine echoed through the thick window panes. DeAndre froze. He recognized the heavy purr of the new Porsche Brenda had purchased with their son's stolen college fund. Tires screeched against the driveway pavement. She was home early. DeAndre checked the progress bar. 80%. He heard the heavy front door open and slam shut. The sharp, rapid clicking of her designer heels resonated against the marble floor of the foyer. She was walking purposefully, heading straight for the hallway leading to the office. 90%. DeAndre frantically minimized the documents on the screen, leaving only the transfer window visible. The clicking of heels grew significantly louder, advancing past the kitchen. Brenda's voice called out from the hallway, sharp and impatient. "I saw your SUV in the driveway. Why are you home in the middle of the day?" 95%. The brass handle of the office door began to turn. DeAndre's pulse roared in his ears. He could not fight her right now. If she saw the downloaded evidence, she would alert Patricia instantly, and they would both be dead before Saturday. 100%. Transfer complete. DeAndre ripped the flash drive from the port and shoved it deep into his scrub pocket. He yanked the decryption tool out and slammed the computer power button, plunging the screen into total darkness. He lunged silently toward the secondary door connecting the office to the adjacent guest bathroom, slipping through the threshold just as the main office door swung wide open. He pulled the bathroom door perfectly flush, leaving only a microscopic crack to peer through. He held his breath, pressing his back flat against the tiled wall. Brenda stood in the center of the office holding a stack of shopping bags. She frowned, surveying the empty room. She walked over to the desk and placed her hand on the computer monitor. DeAndre watched a cruel, calculated smile spread across her face. She pulled her phone from her purse and dialed a number. She put the phone on speaker and tossed it onto the desk. "Mom." Brenda said, her voice dripping with sinister excitement. "It is me. I just got back from the jeweler's. Have you heard anything about Nora?" Patricia's voice crackled through the speaker, arrogant and dismissive. The police are searching the ashes of her house right now. The local news is already painting her as a deranged criminal who could not handle the guilt of embezzling our money. She is either dead or running scared. It does not matter. The narrative is set. Excellent, Brenda replied, running her manicured fingers over the glass desk. And what about my husband? Have you finalized the arrangements for the mechanic? Yes, Patricia answered coldly. The brake lines on his SUV will be severed on Saturday night while he is inside the gala. By the time he drives home, the fluid will be completely drained. The crash will look exactly like Ryan's accident. The life insurance paperwork is airtight, Brenda. By Sunday morning, you will be a grieving widow with $10 million, and DeAndre will take the blame for the medical fraud from the grave. DeAndre stood paralyzed in the dark bathroom, his hands balled into tight fists. He had the complete financial puzzle secured in his pocket. The trap was fully loaded, and his wife had just confidently stepped right onto the trigger. DeAndre waited until Brenda's footsteps receded entirely into the master bedroom. He slipped out of the bathroom silent as a shadow and exited the house through the side door. The biting winter air hit his lungs like shattered glass, but he barely registered the freezing temperature. He had the flash drive gripped so tightly in his palm that the plastic casing bit into his skin. He drove straight to our designated rendezvous point, an abandoned retail parking lot on the edge of the city limits. I was waiting in the driver's seat of a cheap rental sedan I had acquired with cash earlier that afternoon. When DeAndre climbed into the passenger seat, his eyes were completely hollow, stripped of the compassionate doctor I once knew. He handed me the flash drive and recounted the phone call he had just overheard. The $10 million life insurance policy, the severed brake lines, the staged car crash meticulously planned for Saturday night. I listened without interrupting, my hands resting on the steering wheel. The sheer magnitude of Patricia's evil was staggering, but it also confirmed my analytical theory. She was actively accelerating her timeline. She needed every loose end tied up in a neat bloody bow before the foundation gala. We need to move right now, I told DeAndre, firing up the rental car engine. Patricia thinks I perished in the fire or ran away like a coward. But she also knows Ryan's vintage Mustang is still sitting inside my detached garage, completely untouched by the flames. DeAndre frowned, snapping his seatbelt into place. The police tape is still up around your property. The fire department locked down the entire perimeter for the arson investigation. Patricia does not care about yellow police tape, I replied, accelerating and merging onto the highway. She knows the physical ledger and the original flash drive were hidden inside that vehicle. She thinks the car is a ticking time bomb waiting to expose her syndicate. She will not leave it there for the insurance investigators to confiscate. She is going to steal it tonight and crush it into a solid cube of scrap metal. We parked 2 blocks away from my ruined home, hiding the unassuming rental car behind a dense row of overgrown pine trees. The acrid scent of charred wood and melted plastic still hung heavily in the night air. The main house was a blackened, hollowed shell, a devastating monument to Patricia's absolute cruelty. My wedding photos, my clothes, my life with Ryan, all reduced to toxic ash. But the detached garage, situated 50 feet back on the property line, remained perfectly intact. I pulled a tablet from my tote bag and opened a highly secured tracking application. A bright blue dot blinked steadily on the digital map, marking the exact coordinates of my garage. DeAndre leaned over the center console, staring at the glowing screen. What exactly am I looking at? I smiled, a cold and calculating expression taking over my face. Before I fled the motel this morning, I realized Patricia would inevitably come for the Mustang. I could not risk driving a highly recognizable vintage sports car while being framed on the local news as a fugitive arsonist. So I left it behind on purpose. But I removed the original ledger and the encrypted flash drive, and I wired a military-grade GPS tracker directly into the vehicle alternator. Just as I finished speaking, a massive flatbed tow truck rumbled down my quiet suburban street. It cut its headlights a block away, rolling forward in complete stealth mode. The heavy truck backed aggressively up my driveway, crushing my mailbox and rolling straight over the police barricade lines. 2 figures emerged from the cab of the truck. Even in the dim glow of the neighborhood street lamps, their silhouettes were unmistakable. Patricia and Brenda had come to finish the job themselves. They were not trusting hired thugs with a task this critical. They wanted to witness the destruction of the evidence with their own eyes. Patricia marched toward the garage side door, the exact same door they had battered open the night before. She disappeared inside for a brief moment. A loud mechanical grinding noise echoed through the quiet neighborhood as she manually hoisted the heavy main garage door upward. The sleek black body of Ryan's Mustang sat gleaming in the moonlight, completely unharmed and ready for transport. Brenda clapped her hands together, practically bouncing on her heels with giddy, unearned excitement. She gestured frantically for the tow truck driver to lower the hydraulic ramp. The driver, a large man wearing a dark beanie and heavy work gloves, hooked thick steel chains to the front chassis of the Mustang. The motorized winch whirred loudly, dragging the heavy car out of the garage and hauling it up onto the flatbed. "They are actually stealing it!" DeAndre whispered, his voice laced with disbelief and rising anger. "They are committing grand theft auto right in the middle of an active federal crime scene." "Arrogance makes criminals incredibly stupid," I replied, watching Patricia hand the tow truck driver a thick manila envelope presumably filled with untraceable cash. She thinks she is erasing her son's final act of defiance. She thinks crushing that car will guarantee her safety. She is literally paying a man to transport a federal tracking device directly to her illicit salvage yard. Patricia walked around the flatbed, running her manicured hand along the side of the Mustang. She looked completely triumphant. She turned to Brenda, flashing a wicked, victorious smile, and nodded sharply. The two women climbed back into the cab of the tow truck. The heavy diesel engine roared to life, sending a plume of dark exhaust into the air, and the truck pulled away from my ruined property, accelerating quickly down the street. I watched the red taillights disappear around the corner. On my tablet screen, the bright blue dot began to move in real time, tracing a direct path toward the industrial waterfront district. I tapped the screen, locking onto the specific digital signal. "Let them crush the car," I said, leaning back against the driver's seat and staring into the darkness. The physical vehicle means absolutely nothing now. Every shred of data, every bank routing number, every forged medical invoice is currently secured on my encrypted Swiss cloud server. We have the hospital procurement logs. We have the life insurance modification forms detailing their assassination plot. We have everything. DeAndre looked at me, his jaw set with lethal determination. "What is our next move?" I put the car in gear, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight. "Tomorrow morning I package this entire digital arsenal into a formal whistleblower dossier. And then we hand it directly to the special agent in charge of the Federal Financial Crimes Division. The trap is fully set, DeAndre. We are just handing the government the detonator." Dawn broke over the city with a bitter freeze. I had not slept a single minute since watching Patricia haul away the Mustang. Sitting in the sterile conference room of the Federal Bureau of Investigation Regional Field Office, my physical exhaustion was entirely eclipsed by pure adrenaline. DeAndre sat rigidly beside me, still wearing his dark hospital scrubs, his hands resting flat against the cold steel table. Across from us sat Special Agent Thomas Reynolds from the Financial Crimes Division and IRS criminal investigator David Miller. They were hardened federal veterans, men who had spent decades dismantling corporate syndicates, but the sheer volume of organized data. I slid across the table, left them momentarily speechless. I did not give them raw files. I handed them a fully executed prosecution package. I pushed the thick-bound whistleblower dossier toward Agent Reynolds. Inside that binder is the complete digital footprint of a $50 million money laundering operation orchestrated by Patricia and Brenda. I provided the offshore routing numbers, the shell company registration documents in the Cayman Islands, and the fabricated logistics invoices used to mask the initial cash flow. Agent Reynolds opened the binder, his eyes scanning the executive summary I had drafted. "You mapped the entire syndicate overnight," he noted, looking up at me with a mixture of suspicion and profound professional respect. "I am a corporate compliance auditor," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. "Finding buried money is what I do for a living." Patricia thought I was just a naive widow she could bully out of a house. She made a catastrophic miscalculation. Agent Miller leaned forward, tapping a pen against his notepad. Offshore accounts are notoriously difficult to freeze without international cooperation. Even with this ledger, Patricia could move the funds deeper into the dark web before we secure a federal warrant. That is where the hospital procurement logs come into play, DeAndre interjected, pulling his manila envelope from his coat pocket and placing it squarely next to my dossier. Patricia needed to clean the money through a legitimate high-volume domestic institution. She used my medical license and my digital hospital credentials to authorize millions of dollars in fake surgical equipment purchases. I pulled these logs directly from the hospital server yesterday. You will see her logistics firm build the trauma center, and the money was washed right back into her pockets. The two federal agents exchanged a sharp, immediate look. The inclusion of a federally funded hospital network elevated the crimes from standard corporate embezzlement to severe federal healthcare fraud and massive identity theft. But there is an active, ticking clock. I continued leaning closer to the federal agents. Patricia is accelerating her timeline. She burned my house down to the foundation 24 hours ago, attempting to destroy any physical evidence Ryan left behind. She staged it to look like a desperate suicide to close the book on her son's supposed embezzlement. And she is not stopping there. DeAndre slid the final printed document across the table. It was the life insurance policy adjustment. Brenda increased my death benefit to $10 million 3 days ago. She added a specific clause for fatal motor vehicle collisions. I overheard her on the phone confirming that my brake lines will be severed this Saturday night. They murdered Ryan to silence him, and they are planning to murder me this weekend to secure their final payout before fleeing the country. The atmosphere in the interrogation room instantly shifted from a white-collar financial review to an active high-stakes homicide prevention protocol. Agent Reynolds stood up, pacing the length of the small room. We have enough to arrest them for the attempted insurance fraud and the property arson, Reynolds stated, pulling out his secure mobile device. But if we move right now, we miss the bulk of the offshore cash. They will lawyer up, and those Cayman accounts will vanish into thin air. We do not move now, I commanded, asserting total control over the federal strategy. We let them execute the final transfer. According to Ryan's master ledger, Patricia uses the Foundation Logistics Charity Gala as a smokescreen to move her largest annual sum. This Saturday night, precisely at 9 o'clock during the keynote speech, $8 million in dirty cash will be mixed with the legitimate charity donations and routed electronically to the islands. If your cyber division taps into their network during the gala, you can catch the wire transfer in motion. You seize the funds in real time, locking the accounts before the money leaves United States jurisdiction. Agent Miller nodded enthusiastically, vigorously typing notes into his secure laptop. She is absolutely right. Catching the wire fraud in the act of transmission gives us immediate federal seizure authority. We can freeze the entire syndicate simultaneously. But it requires me to play the role of the oblivious husband for 2 more days. DeAndre said, his jaw tightening at the prospect of looking Brenda in the eye. I have to attend that gala knowing she plans to send me to my death on the drive home. We will have an undercover surveillance team on you the entire night, Agent Reynolds assured him. We will secure your vehicle the moment you arrive at the venue. Brenda will never get anywhere near your brake lines. We let them initiate the massive wire transfer, and the moment the digital money moves, we raid the event. The federal trap was officially locked into place. I spent the next 4 hours walking the cyber division agents through the encrypted flash drive, showing them exactly which IP addresses Patricia used for her banking portals. By the time DeAndre and I walked out of the federal building, the sun was high in the freezing winter sky. We had absolute immunity, and we had the full weight of the United States government backing our retaliation. I returned to a new secure hotel room arranged by the authorities, while DeAndre headed back to his suburban nightmare to play his part. He had to pack his bags and pretend he was looking forward to the biggest social event of the season. The ultimate confirmation of our impending victory arrived late Friday afternoon. I was sitting at the hotel desk reviewing my compliance reports when DeAndre sent a secure text message containing a single photograph. It was an image of a thick gold-embossed envelope resting on his granite kitchen counter. Brenda had personally delivered his tuxedo for the event, along with 2 VIP all-access passes to the Foundation Logistics Charity Gala. She had smiled, kissed his cheek, and told him how excited she was for their future together. Enclosed within that opulent envelope was a schedule of events highlighting Patricia's keynote speech at 9 o'clock. The gold lettering on the invitation shimmered in the photograph, a grotesque display of wealth built entirely on blood deceit and stolen futures. They were hosting a grand celebration of their own perceived invincibility, completely unaware that they had just invited their own executioners. The charity gala was no longer a sophisticated social gathering for the city elite. It was officially the designated battleground for their absolute destruction, and I had exactly 24 hours to prepare for the final strike. Saturday night arrived with a heavy blanket of snow covering the city, but the grand ballroom of the Heritage Plaza Hotel radiated a sickening artificial warmth. DeAndre stepped out of his SUV at the valet stand. A man in a dark overcoat casually intercepted the keys before the actual valet could reach them. The man gave DeAndre a subtle nod, confirming the federal surveillance team had secured the vehicle. The severed brake line plot was officially neutralized. DeAndre adjusted the cuffs of his tailored tuxedo, forced a serene smile onto his face, and walked into the lion's den. The Foundation Logistics Charity Gala was a grotesque monument to Patricia's greed. Towering ice sculptures carved into the shapes of cargo ships dominated the room. Waiters in crisp white gloves circulated with silver trays of vintage champagne and imported caviar. Crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling light over the city elite. Politicians, hospital administrators, and real estate developers mingled, all utterly oblivious that they were drinking alcohol funded by phantom medical supplies and offshore cartels. DeAndre scanned the massive ballroom and found Brenda immediately. She was holding court near the center stage wearing a custom silk gown that undoubtedly cost more than a teacher's annual salary. Patricia stood beside her, dripping in diamonds, laughing loudly at a joke made by a prominent city councilman. They looked radiant. They looked completely invincible. DeAndre walked over to his wife. Brenda turned her eyes, lighting up with manufactured adoration. She wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing his cheek for the benefit of the surrounding audience. "You made it, darling," Brenda cooed, handing him a flute of champagne. "I was worried the hospital would keep you trapped all night. Tonight is too important to miss." DeAndre took the glass, his stomach churning at the proximity to her. "I would never miss this, Brenda. I know how much tonight means to your family." Patricia dismissed the councilman and turned her predatory gaze toward DeAndre. "It means everything," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Especially after the horrific week we just endured. The tragedy with Ryan, and then the absolute nightmare with Nora." Brenda sighed dramatically, placing a manicured hand over her heart. "It is still so hard to believe she would do something so evil. Embezzling from our logistics company, and then setting her own house on fire to cover her tracks. The police still have not found a body in the ashes, but the investigators told us she likely perished in the blaze. It is tragic, really. But we have to stay strong and move forward." DeAndre forced himself to nod, taking a slow sip of the champagne to hide his revulsion. They were gloating. They were standing in a room paid for by stolen money, celebrating the execution they had ordered for him, and mourning a woman they had actively tried to burn alive. "You both look remarkably composed, considering the circumstances," DeAndre observed smoothly. "We are survivors," Patricia stated, lifting her chin with arrogant pride. "We do not shatter, we adapt, we rebuild. And tonight we honor Ryan's true legacy by raising millions for the community." The hypocrisy was suffocating. DeAndre watched as Patricia effortlessly charmed a group of wealthy investors. She was a master manipulator, extracting massive checks from these men under the guise of philanthropy. The truth was, every dollar collected tonight would be mixed with the $8 million of dirty cartel cash currently sitting in a holding account, ready to be routed to the Cayman Islands. Brenda leaned close to DeAndre, her perfume overwhelming his senses. "After tonight, everything changes for us," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with a toxic, predatory excitement. "No more stress. No more financial worries. We are going to have the perfect life. I just wish Ryan could be here to see it." DeAndre looked down at the woman he once loved. He thought about the $10 million life insurance policy sitting in her home office, the fatal car crash she had meticulously planned for him later this evening. I am sure Ryan is watching us right now. DeAndre replied, his voice laced with a double meaning she was entirely too arrogant to catch. He knows exactly what is happening tonight. Brenda smiled, oblivious to the federal crosshairs targeted directly at her chest. The grandfather clock in the corner of the ballroom chimed the half hour. It was 8:30, 30 minutes until Patricia took the stage for her keynote speech. 30 minutes until the massive wire transfer was initiated. DeAndre excused himself, claiming he needed to greet his hospital administrator across the room. He navigated through the sea of silk and diamonds, keeping his eyes sharp. He spotted Agent Reynolds dressed in a high-end tuxedo, blending perfectly into a group of corporate bankers near the bar. Reynolds caught DeAndre's eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The cyber division was locked in. The trap was fully armed. DeAndre found a quiet alcove near the kitchen service doors and pulled out his encrypted phone. He sent a single one-word text message to the secure number I had provided him earlier that day. Ready. I was parked in a black surveillance van 3 blocks away from the Heritage Plaza Hotel, sitting shoulder to shoulder with Agent Miller. A bank of glowing monitors illuminated the cramped space inside the vehicle. We had tapped directly into the hotel security camera feed and the primary audiovisual system in the grand ballroom. I watched the high-definition feed as Patricia glided across the ballroom floor. She looked like untouchable royalty. I pulled the collar of my tailored white suit jacket tighter around my neck. I had shed the black funeral dress and the role of the grieving widow. I was dressed for a final corporate execution. Agent Miller typed rapidly. The Logistics Foundation network is active, he reported. They just opened the gateway to the offshore holding accounts. The transfer protocol begins right now. The transfer protocol begins right now. Agent Miller's fingers flew across the illuminated keyboard inside the cramped surveillance van. He executed the override command with ruthless precision. He confirmed the massive $8 million sum was currently moving from the logistics charity account into the digital ether. It was the absolute critical window of vulnerability. If the federal authorities seized the transfer too early, Patricia could simply claim a clerical banking error and shut down the operation. If they waited too long, the money would disappear into the Cayman Islands and shatter into 100 untraceable shell companies. Miller initiated the federal intercept, catching the illicit funds exactly halfway across the international digital border. The money was locked. The syndicate was officially bleeding out. I pushed the heavy sliding door of the surveillance van open and stepped out into the freezing snow. My tailored white suit jacket offered zero protection against the brutal winter wind, but I felt absolutely nothing except burning anticipation. I walked toward the main entrance of the Heritage Plaza Hotel, my heels clicking sharply against the icy pavement. The valet attendants barely glanced at me, assuming I was just another late-arriving corporate socialite. I bypassed the main reception desk and headed straight for the grand ballroom. 2 massive private security guards flanked the carved wooden doors of the venue. One of them stepped forward, raising a heavy hand to stop me, demanding to see my VIP invitation. Before I could even speak, a man in a dark tuxedo stepped out of the shadows near the coat check. It was an undercover federal agent. He flashed a gold badge shielded in the palm of his hand directly at the guard. The security guard immediately stepped back, his eyes wide with sudden realization, and quickly pulled the heavy doors open for me. The grand ballroom was a sensory overload of crystal chandeliers, clinking champagne glasses, and the low, arrogant murmurs of extreme wealth. The massive ice sculptures shaped like cargo ships were slowly melting under the hot stage lights. I stood at the back of the room for a fraction of a second, letting the sheer scale of Patricia's delusion wash over me. She had built this entire opulent empire on blood-forged documents and the destruction of her own family. At the very front of the room, Patricia tapped the microphone. A sharp feedback whine cut through the ambient noise, silencing the hundreds of elite guests. She stood at the center stage podium, looking like a queen surveying her loyal, wealthy subjects. Brenda was seated at the primary VIP table right in front of the stage, clapping enthusiastically, playing the role of the devoted and grieving daughter. DeAndre sat next to her, his face a perfect mask of polite attention, knowing the federal guillotine was hovering mere inches above their heads. I began walking straight down the central aisle. The thick, luxurious carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps. Patricia cleared her throat, her voice echoing through the massive state-of-the-art speakers. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, projecting perfect manufactured empathy. "This year has brought unimaginable tragedy to our family. We lost my brilliant son Ryan, and just days ago we endured the devastating betrayal of his widow Nora, who stole from this very foundation and destroyed her own home in a fit of desperate guilt." I was halfway down the aisle. A few guests in the back rows noticed me and gasped, parting like the Red Sea to let me pass. Patricia continued, her eyes fixed entirely on the glass teleprompter. "But we rise from the ashes. We take that pain and we channel it into philanthropy. Tonight we are transferring a record-breaking $8 million to our global partners." "I am afraid that transaction has been permanently declined, Patricia," I said. My voice did not need a microphone. It cut through the silent ballroom like a freshly sharpened blade. The entire crowd turned in unison. Hundreds of wealthy investors, powerful politicians, and socialites stared at me in absolute paralyzing shock. I was supposed to be a pile of ash in a burned-out suburban home. I was supposed to be a disgraced, suicidal fugitive. Instead, I was walking straight toward the stage wearing an immaculate white suit, looking more powerful and composed than Patricia ever had in her entire miserable life. Patricia froze. The color drained completely from her face. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the edges of the wooden podium so hard her knuckles turned stark white. She stared at me as if a literal ghost had just manifested in the middle of her crowning achievement. Brenda leaped up from the VIP table, her chair crashing backward onto the polished floor. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her face twisting in sudden violent panic. "Security!" Brenda screamed, her voice shrill and echoing wildly. "Grab her! She is a fugitive! She is an arsonist! Throw her out of this building right now!" 4 private security guards in black suits immediately rushed down the side aisles, closing in on me to execute the order. I did not even break my stride. Before the guards could get within 10 feet of me, 4 different men in the crowd simultaneously stepped directly into their paths. Agent Reynolds emerged from the group of corporate bankers near the bar, blocking the lead guard. Reynolds did not shout or cause a scene. He simply opened his tuxedo jacket, revealing the federal sidearm strapped to his chest and the FBI credential clipped to his belt. The private security guards froze, instantly raising their hands and stepping away, realizing they were vastly outranked and completely surrounded by federal authorities. I reached the front of the room. Brenda tried to lunge at me, her heavy silk gown tangling around her legs. "You deranged psychopath," she hissed, her eyes wild with desperation. "You are going to prison for the rest of your life." I completely ignored her. I walked past the VIP table and ascended the short carpeted staircase to the main stage. Patricia stood paralyzed behind the podium. She tried to block my path, puffing out her chest, desperately attempting to maintain her illusion of ultimate authority. "You are trespassing, Nora." Patricia snarled, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper only I could hear. "I will have you destroyed for this." I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice. I simply placed my hand firmly on her shoulder and shoved her hard to the left. Patricia, completely off balance and utterly shocked by the physical dominance, stumbled backward in her expensive diamond heels, nearly tripping over the thick microphone cord. I stepped up to the podium and gripped the microphone. I looked out over the sea of confused, terrified faces. I looked down at Brenda, who was now being quietly flanked by Agent Reynolds and another undercover officer. Then I looked directly at DeAndre, who finally allowed a grim, victorious smile to break across his exhausted face. "My name is Nora," I announced, my voice booming through the sound system. "And contrary to the stories you have been told this week, I did not embezzle a single dime from the Foundation Logistics Company. I did not burn my house down. I am a corporate compliance auditor, and I have spent the last 48 hours working directly with the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI to dismantle the $50 million money laundering syndicate operating right in front of your eyes." A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. Guests began muttering frantically. Dozens of people pulled out their phones, realizing they were currently standing in the exact epicenter of a massive federal sting operation. Patricia scrambled to regain control. She lunged toward me, her face flushed with pure, unadulterated rage. "Turn off the sound system," she screamed at the audio technician in the back booth. "Cut her microphone right now. She is lying." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was already connected to the secure federal network Agent Miller had established from the van. I hit a single execution button. "I am bypassing the audio technician, Patricia," I said smoothly into the microphone. "Because the federal government now controls every digital asset in this building, including those screens." The massive projection screens behind the stage, which had been displaying the elegant Foundation logo all night, suddenly flickered. The logo vanished instantly, replaced by high-definition, undeniable federal evidence. The massive screens illuminated with the exact offshore banking records, the fabricated logistics invoices, and the forged medical procurement documents bearing DeAndre's stolen credentials. The entire financial anatomy of Patricia's criminal empire was suddenly 10 feet tall, broadcasted for every politician, investor, and news camera in the city to see. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, a heavy, suffocating vacuum that stretched for 5 agonizing seconds. Then the flash of a single news camera broke the spell, and the entire room erupted into pure, unadulterated chaos. Hundreds of the most powerful people in the city surged forward, not to protect Patricia, but to stare at the glowing screens displaying their own complicity. Mayors, senators, and corporate titans realized they were currently sipping champagne at a federal crime scene. The projected images were perfectly crisp, highlighting the exact routing numbers and forged signatures that built the logistics foundation. The financial architecture of their philanthropy was exposed as a rotting, criminal hollow. Patricia frantically waved her hands in front of the projector lens, an absurd and pathetic gesture that only cast her frantic shadow across the damning evidence. "This is a fabrication," she shrieked, her voice cracking as the microphone amplified her desperation. "This woman is a domestic terrorist. She hacked our servers to project these lies. Security, remove her right now." I did not back down. I stepped around the podium, placing myself directly between Patricia and her audience. I looked straight into the lens of the primary news camera set up in the center aisle, knowing this feed was likely broadcasting live to millions. "Look at the top right corner of the primary display," I commanded, my voice projecting clearly over the rising panic of the crowd. "That is a live capture from a federal cyber division intercept. Exactly 4 minutes ago, this foundation attempted to wire $8 million in supposedly charitable donations to a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands. The transaction was intercepted halfway across the digital border. The money you donated tonight is currently frozen in federal custody, seized as evidence of a transnational money laundering syndicate." The outrage from the VIP tables was immediate. A prominent real estate developer slammed his champagne flute onto the table, shattering the crystal against the heavy linen. "You are washing cartel money through our donations," he roared at Patricia, his face purple with fury as he pointed a trembling finger at the stage. Brenda scrambled onto the stage, her high heels catching on the hem of her expensive silk gown. She grabbed her mother's arm, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. "It is a deep fake," Brenda screamed, pointing a shaking hand at me. "She is using artificial intelligence to ruin us. Look at the medical invoices on the screen. She forged my husband's signature to make it look like we stole from his hospital. She is trying to ruin a brilliant surgeon to save her own skin." At the mention of his name, DeAndre stood up from the VIP table. He did not look like the compliant, exhausted doctor they expected. He stood tall, stripping off his custom tuxedo jacket and tossing it onto the floor symbolically, severing his ties to their extravagant world. "She did not forge my signature," DeAndre declared, his deep voice carrying easily across the chaotic room. He walked toward the edge of the stage, glaring up at the woman he had married. "You did, Brenda. You used my medical license to authorize $12 million in phantom surgical supplies. You took a second mortgage out on our home. You drained my son's college fund to buy a sports car. And when you realized the FBI might catch on, you decided I was worth more to you dead." The ballroom fell quiet again, a chilling realization sweeping through the crowd. The guests watched the respected trauma surgeon systematically destroy his own wife's alibi. I pulled my phone from my pocket and swiped the screen, advancing the presentation to the next slide. The massive screens shifted from banking ledgers to a highly detailed, legally binding document. I pointed to the new image. This is a life insurance policy adjustment filed 3 days ago by Brenda. I explained, keeping my tone entirely clinical and detached. She increased the death benefit on her husband to $10 million, specifically adding a payout clause for a fatal motor vehicle collision. I turned to face Patricia, who was now trembling violently, the color completely drained from her lips. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for an exit that did not exist. Ryan discovered your operation, I stated, the cold truth finally laid bare in front of the entire city. He found the physical ledger in your office. He realized his own mother and sister were using his company to wash dirty money. And when he threatened to expose you, you cut the brake lines on his vintage Mustang. You murdered my husband to protect your offshore accounts. Gasps of genuine horror echoed through the room. Several guests physically backed away from the stage, viewing Patricia and Brenda not as disgraced socialites, but as calculated murderers. The elite facade was completely shattered. And you plan to do it again tonight? I continued. My eyes locked onto Brenda, who was now openly weeping, her carefully constructed persona crumbling into dust. You hired a mechanic to sever the brake lines on DeAndre's SUV while he was inside this very ballroom. You plan to let him drive home, crash into a concrete barrier, and take the blame for the medical fraud from the grave, leaving you a grieving widow with a $10 million payout. Brenda collapsed onto the stage, burying her face in her hands, her sobs amplified by the ambient microphones. Patricia, however, did not cry. Her shock morphed into a cornered, feral rage. She dropped her polished demeanor entirely. She lunged at me with her bare hands, her fingernails clawing toward my face, screaming obscenities that echoed violently through the venue. She never made it. Agent Reynolds vaulted onto the stage with terrifying speed. He grabbed Patricia's arm, twisting it sharply behind her back, and slammed her face first into the wooden podium. The dull thud of the impact silenced her screams instantly. Patricia, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and the attempted murder of DeAndre Reynolds, announced, snapping heavy steel handcuffs around her wrists. Agent Miller and a dozen other undercover officers simultaneously dropped their disguises, moving through the crowd to secure the exits. Nobody leaves, Miller shouted, holding his federal badge high in the air. This entire venue is now an active crime scene. Please remain in your seats and prepare your identification. I stood on the stage watching as the federal agents systematically dismantled the elite illusion Patricia had spent decades building. The news cameras were still rolling, capturing every single second of the arrests. The live broadcast would ensure that by tomorrow morning, their names would be synonymous with the most ruthless corporate fraud in modern history. The money was seized, the evidence was secured, and the assassins who killed my husband were currently being dragged away in chains, stripped of their power and their pride, left with absolutely nothing but the impending reality of a federal prison cell. Brenda remained crumpled on the polished wooden stage, her expensive silk gown pooling around her like a deflated parachute. She looked up through her tangled hair, mascara running down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks. She watched her mother being hauled toward the service exit by Agent Reynolds, the metallic click of the handcuffs echoing sharply across the silent room. Patricia did not look back. Her arrogance had finally fractured, leaving only the panicked realization that her empire was completely gone. Brenda turned her desperate, pleading eyes toward DeAndre. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers grasping at the empty air between them. DeAndre. She sobbed, her voice a pathetic imitation of the confident, commanding woman who had hosted this gala just 10 minutes ago. Please, you have to help me. I am your wife. We have a son. You cannot let them do this to me. I was just following her orders. She made me do it. DeAndre did not rush to comfort her. He did not offer his hand. He stood perfectly still, looking down at the woman who had meticulously planned his brutal death to secure a $10 million payout. The exhaustion that had plagued him all week was entirely gone, replaced by the cold, clinical precision of a surgeon standing over an operating table. He reached into the inner pocket of his trousers and pulled out a thick, folded legal document. You stopped being my wife the moment you forged my signature to steal from my hospital, DeAndre said, his voice completely devoid of warmth. And you lost the right to ever mention our son the moment you drained his college fund to buy yourself a luxury car while plotting to leave him fatherless. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, towering over her. You thought I was just a naive doctor. You thought my grueling schedule made me the perfect blind mark. But you forgot what I actually do for a living, Brenda. I specialize in trauma. I assess catastrophic damage. I isolate the source of the bleeding and I cut it out to save the patient. DeAndre unfolded the heavy packet of papers. The crisp white pages stood out starkly against the dim lighting of the ballroom. He dropped the documents directly onto her lap. What is this? Brenda whispered, staring down at the legal seals stamped across the top page. Those are expedited divorce papers, DeAndre explained, projecting his voice, so the remaining federal agents and the stunned crowd could hear every single word. I filed them yesterday afternoon with a specialized family law attorney. But more importantly, that packet includes a completely finalized court-ordered emergency asset freeze. Brenda recoiled as if the papers were physically burning her skin. An asset freeze. Yes, DeAndre confirmed, his eyes locking onto hers with lethal intensity. When Nora and I handed the whistleblower dossier to the Federal Financial Crimes Division, the FBI immediately contacted a federal judge. They presented the evidence of your transnational money laundering and the forged second mortgage on our home. Furthermore, when I accessed the hospital procurement server, I did not just download the logs. I immediately walked into the office of the hospital's chief legal counsel. I presented the undeniable proof that you and your mother were using the hospital's federal funding structure to wash dirty money. The hospital administration coordinated with the FBI to lock your logistics firm out of every single vendor network in the state. The judge signed the injunction at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Every single bank account with your name attached to it, both domestic and offshore, has been completely locked by the United States government. Your credit cards are canceled. The equity in our home has been legally secured solely in my name pending the fraud investigation. Brenda stared at him, her mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. The reality of her total destruction was finally penetrating her calculated delusions. You thought you could drain my resources and leave me to take the fall for your federal crimes, DeAndre continued ruthlessly. But I completely severed your financial lifelines. You cannot hire a high-powered defense attorney. You cannot post bail when they process you tonight. You have absolutely zero access to any of the money you stole, and you will never see our son again. I have already been granted temporary emergency sole custody. No, Brenda screamed, scrambling backward on the stage, clutching the divorce papers against her chest, as if holding them could somehow reverse the damage. You cannot do this to me. I am a partner in the foundation. I have rights. Your only right now is a phone call from a federal holding cell, I interrupted, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with DeAndre. I looked down at Brenda, feeling a profound, absolute sense of closure. You tried to burn me alive, Brenda. You tried to erase my husband's legacy to protect a criminal syndicate. You thought you were untouchable because you wore designer clothes and hid behind charity galas. But a forensic auditor always follows the money, and the money led straight to your execution. Agent Miller stepped onto the stage holding a second pair of heavy steel handcuffs. He grabbed Brenda by the upper arm, hauling her to her feet with zero regard for her expensive silk gown. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, massive identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder, Miller recited loudly, securing her wrists behind her back. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you start using it right now. Brenda did not fight him. The fight had been entirely drained out of her. She hung her head, sobbing uncontrollably, as Agent Miller marched her down the stage stairs and straight down the center aisle of the ballroom. The wealthy politicians and corporate investors parted ways, refusing to make eye contact with the disgraced woman, completely distancing themselves from the toxic fallout of the syndicate. DeAndre and I stood side by side on the stage, watching the total collapse of the family empire. The elite guests were now being systematically processed by the undercover cyber division agents, their identification recorded before they were allowed to leave the contaminated crime scene. The massive projection screens behind us were still broadcasting the damning federal evidence, casting a stark, undeniable light over the shattered remnants of the charity gala. Outside the heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom, the distant piercing wail of police sirens began to rise in the freezing night air. The sound multiplied rapidly, echoing off the towering skyscrapers of the downtown district. Dozens of federal transport vehicles and local police cruisers were converging on the Heritage Plaza Hotel, arriving to haul the entire logistics syndicate away in chains. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom did not just open, they were violently breached. A wave of heavily armed federal tactical agents clad in dark tactical gear and Kevlar vests flooded into the opulent venue. The deafening sound of sirens outside was suddenly overpowered by the booming commands of tactical commanders, ordering hundreds of the wealthiest people in the city to put their hands where they could be seen. The charity gala, a monument to high society, instantly transformed into a hard perimeter tactical lockdown. Agent Reynolds and Agent Miller, still standing on the stage with the handcuffed antagonists, flashed their badges to the incoming tactical teams. Two uniformed officers rushed the stage, roughly taking custody of Patricia and Brenda. There was no gentle treatment, no respect for the custom silk gowns, or the millions of dollars in diamonds hanging from their necks. The officers hoisted them to their feet with the brutal efficiency reserved for high-level cartel operatives. Patricia stumbled, her expensive heels catching on the microphone cord she had nearly tripped over earlier. She looked out at the sea of her peers. The city councilmen, the hospital administrators, and the elite investors who had kissed her ring for decades were now shrinking away in absolute terror. The news cameras in the center aisle pivoted directly onto her, the harsh flashes illuminating the sweat ruining her flawless makeup. The humiliation was absolute, physical, and suffocating. As the officers dragged Patricia down the short wooden stairs of the stage, her carefully constructed mask of arrogant stoicism violently shattered. The realization that she was leaving this hotel for a concrete federal holding cell finally broke her mind. She dug the heels of her shoes into the plush carpet, violently twisting her shoulders in a futile attempt to resist the tactical officers. "This is your fault!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking with a raw, unhinged fury. She twisted her neck to glare violently at Brenda, who was being marched down the aisle right behind her. "You stupid, greedy little girl." Brenda recoiled, her tear-streaked face twisting in sudden shock. The officers shoved Brenda forward, forcing her to keep pace with her mother. "I handed you a perfect, untraceable system," Patricia roared, ignoring the commands of the federal agents to remain silent. "All you had to do was maintain the hospital ledger. But you could not control yourself. You had to drain his bank accounts. You had to steal your own son's college fund to buy a sports car. You left a trail of financial breadcrumbs right to our front door because you wanted to play rich. You ruined everything." The sheer venom in Patricia's voice echoed through the silent, terrified ballroom. She was publicly disowning her daughter, attempting to cast Brenda as the sole reason their flawless empire had collapsed. Brenda stopped crying. The profound betrayal from the woman who had orchestrated this entire nightmare ignited a frantic, desperate survival instinct. Brenda planted her feet firmly, forcing the federal agent escorting her to physically yank her forward. "Are you blaming me?" Brenda shrieked, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. "You murdered your own son. Ryan found the ledger and you cut his brake lines. You ordered the hit on my husband. You are a monster." Brenda violently turned her head toward Agent Miller, who was walking alongside the tactical escort. "Agent Miller," Brenda yelled, desperate to secure any sliver of leverage. "She forced me to do it. She threatened to cut me out of the foundation if I did not use DeAndre's medical credentials. I have text messages. I have audio recordings on my private phone of her arranging the mechanic for tonight. I will give you everything. I will testify against her in federal court. I want full immunity." "You treacherous little rat!" Patricia snarled, lunging backward toward her daughter, only to be violently restrained and slammed face first into a linen-draped cocktail table by the tactical guards. Champagne glasses shattered onto the floor, sending a spray of expensive crystal and alcohol over Patricia's designer coat. "I am the only reason you have anything. I built this empire. You are nothing without me." "You are going to die in federal prison!" Brenda screamed back, completely unhinged, leaning over the officers restraining her. "And I am going to make sure they lock you in the darkest hole they have. I am giving the FBI your private offshore routing keys. I know where you hid the secondary ledgers. I know about the mayor." The mention of the mayor sent a fresh wave of panic through the corralled VIP guests. A prominent politician near the front row visibly turned pale and attempted to discreetly slip toward the side exit, only to be immediately intercepted and detained by a tactical officer. The rot of Patricia's syndicate ran deeper than anyone had realized, and Brenda was currently weaponizing every single secret to save her own skin. I stood shoulder to shoulder with DeAndre on the main stage, completely untouched by the chaos unfolding on the ballroom floor. We watched in silent, cold satisfaction as the two women ripped each other apart. The fierce family loyalty they had constantly weaponized against me was exposed as a complete and total fraud. Under the crushing pressure of federal prosecution, they were behaving like cornered animals eager to tear out each other's throats for a single ounce of leniency. I looked up at the massive projection screens which were still broadcasting the undeniable proof of their crimes. I had not just defeated them, I had forced them to execute themselves on a public stage. The grief of losing Ryan still anchored heavily in my chest, but the suffocating weight of being hunted was completely gone. The tactical officers had seen enough. They violently hauled Patricia up from the shattered cocktail table. Blood dripped from a small cut above her eyebrow, mixing with her ruined makeup. They frog-marched her toward the main exit doors. Brenda followed closely behind, still screaming accusations, eagerly confessing to massive federal crimes just to ensure her mother took the heaviest blow. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the two women were thrust out into the freezing winter night. The flashing red and blue lights of dozens of police cruisers illuminated the hotel facade. The press had already gathered outside, completely swarming the barricades to capture the fall of the logistics queens. The final image the city would ever see of Patricia and Brenda was not a portrait of elite philanthropy. It was a chaotic, humiliating perp walk. They were shoved into the back of two separate armored federal transport vehicles, screaming vicious insults at one another until the heavy steel doors slammed shut, sealing them inside the total darkness of their own creation. The heavy steel doors slamming shut on the transport vehicles echoed in my mind for exactly 6 months. The bitter winter snow that had blanketed the city during the charity gala melted away, replaced by the suffocating heat of a relentless August sun. I sat at the polished mahogany desk in my newly established independent auditing firm, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the downtown skyline. My firm specialized in forensic corporate recovery, a highly lucrative niche I had mastered by completely dismantling my former in-laws. DeAndre and I had maintained a quiet, unbreakable alliance. He retained full custody of his son, completely unburdened by the crushing debt Brenda had tried to chain to his medical license, while I legally reclaimed every single asset Patricia had attempted to seize from Ryan's estate. The $50 million logistics syndicate was nothing but a cautionary tale studied in federal law enforcement seminars. My office phone buzzed, the private line flashing with an incoming call from a highly secure, restricted federal correctional facility. I knew exactly who it was. The federal prosecutor had warned me earlier this week that the logistics queens were exhausting their final desperate appeals before their formal sentencing hearings. I pressed the speaker button, leaning back in my heavy leather chair, and waited. Brenda's voice crackled through the static-filled line. It was thin, hollow, and utterly broken. The arrogant silk and diamond persona had been entirely stripped away, replaced by the terrified whimper of an inmate facing 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary. I did not say a word. I let the silence hang heavy over the encrypted connection, forcing her to stew in her own absolute desperation. "Please, Nora," Brenda sobbed, the sound pathetic and entirely devoid of the manipulative power she once wielded. "You have to talk to the prosecutor. You have to tell them I was forced into it. My public defender says the judge is going to give me the maximum sentence because I perjured myself during the initial depositions. They took everything from me. I am scrubbing concrete floors for 12 hours a day. My mother has not spoken to me since the night of the gala. She completely threw me to the wolves to try and cut a plea deal for herself, but the FBI rejected it entirely. We have absolutely nothing left." I listened to the wretched sound of her crying. It was the exact same manipulative tone she had used when she tried to convince DeAndre to take the fall for her massive medical fraud. "You took everything from yourself, Brenda." I finally replied, my voice as cold and unyielding as the steel bars currently surrounding her. You chose extreme greed over your own child. You chose murder over accountability. You are exactly where you belong. I reached forward and pressed the disconnect button, cutting off her frantic begging screams instantly. The silence in my office was pristine and absolute. I closed the thick federal case file on my desk and turned back to the bright open sky. Core Writing Guide Instructions. To maintain the exact DNA of the story and effectively distribute the 20,000 words across the remaining narrative sections, the writing structure must utilize continuous plot progression. Each resolved conflict must instantly trigger a new higher-stakes dilemma to ensure absolute audience retention. Character backgrounds should be introduced swiftly through immediate action and dialogue, rather than isolated lengthy exposition blocks. Furthermore, synthesize the pacing, forensic vocabulary and dramatic payoffs found in the previously requested sample scripts. Ensure the entire script is consistently formatted for AI voice narration by maintaining a concise, action-oriented tone without any meaningless punctuation pauses. The pristine silence of my office lasted exactly 10 seconds before the secure line flashed again. This time, the automated federal operator announced an incoming call from the maximum security wing. It was Patricia. She had undoubtedly bullied Brenda into giving up her allotted phone time, desperate to take control of a situation that was completely out of her hands. I pressed the speaker button, keeping my eyes fixed on the city skyline. Nora Patricia began, her tone stripped of its usual venom, replaced by a hollow, calculating desperation. I know Brenda just called you. Do not listen to a word that pathetic girl says. She orchestrated the entire hospital fraud. I can prove it. But I need you to authorize the release of the secondary escrow account. You legally seized my offshore holdings, but there is a domestic trust Ryan set up before his death. If you sign the release waiver, I can afford a competent defense attorney. I will plead guilty to the lesser tax evasion charges and ensure Brenda takes the absolute fall for the medical fraud and the brake line sabotage. I will leave you and DeAndre completely alone forever. The sheer audacity of her request was breathtaking. She was still trying to negotiate from the bottom of a concrete cage, offering to sacrifice her own daughter to buy herself a slightly more comfortable prison cell. I turned my chair back to the heavy mahogany desk and leaned closer to the microphone. Patricia, I said, my voice razor-sharp and completely devoid of emotion. You are still operating under the delusion that you have any leverage left to trade. You do not. Every single dollar you stole, every offshore account you hid, and every trust you manipulated has been permanently seized by the federal government under the civil asset forfeiture laws. I paused, letting the reality of her total financial annihilation sink into the silence. And as the legally recognized executor of Ryan's estate, I worked directly with the federal prosecutor to ensure those seized assets were properly redistributed. The $8 million you tried to wire to the Cayman Islands on the night of the gala was not just frozen. Last week, it was officially donated directly to the pediatric trauma center DeAndre oversees. Your stolen money is currently funding the expansion of a hospital you tried to use as a money laundering front. The rest of the Logistics Foundation assets have been liquidated to compensate the charities you actively defrauded. No, Patricia gasped, a raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated defeat tearing through the phone line. You had no right. That was my money. I built that company with my bare hands. Yao built a graveyard, I corrected her, my tone dropping to an absolute unyielding boundary. You murdered my husband. You plotted to murder DeAndre. You deserve to rot in that cell with absolutely nothing to your name. Do not ever call this number again. The next time I see your face, it will be in a federal courtroom, and I will be sitting in the front row, watching the judge hand down your life sentence. I slammed my hand down on the disconnect button, severing the connection with absolute finality. The flashing red light on the console went dark. I picked up my phone and dialed the telecommunications provider, permanently blocking the federal correctional facility from routing any further calls to my office or my personal devices. The boundary was officially set, reinforced by steel concrete, and the total eradication of their financial legacy. I stood up from my desk, straightening my suit jacket, and walked toward the heavy glass doors of my office. It was time to leave the past exactly where it belonged. I walked out of my private office and into the bustling bullpen of my newly minted forensic accounting firm. The space was bright lined with transparent glass and brushed steel. a stark contrast to the suffocating dark secrets of the logistics foundation I had burned to the ground. My team of 30 junior auditors and senior compliance officers was actively tearing apart a corrupt real estate conglomerate, their monitors filled with the same kind of offshore routing matrices I had used to dismantle my former in-laws. We had built a reputation as the ultimate apex predators of the financial compliance world. If a corporation had dirty money, my firm was the surgical blade that cut it out. The most satisfying victory, however, was the building itself. I had purchased this massive commercial property entirely out of federal foreclosure. The very building where Patricia once orchestrated her $50 million money laundering syndicate was now the headquarters of my operation. We had gutted her opulent, gaudy decor, physically stripping away her legacy. Where she had meticulously hidden cartel cash, my team now exposed corporate fraud to the federal government. I had not just defeated Patricia. I had physically conquered her seat of power, turning her criminal fortress into a beacon of absolute financial justice. I nodded to my lead analyst, approving a federal subpoena submission, and stepped into the private elevator. The descent to the ground floor felt entirely weightless. I walked out into the warm August afternoon, handing my parking ticket to the valet. He brought around my sleek armored black sedan. It was not Ryan's vintage Mustang, but it was a machine built for a woman who no longer needed to hide in the shadows. I drove across the city, navigating the familiar streets with a profound sense of ownership. I pulled into the private parking garage of the downtown Botanical Gardens, a sprawling, secure sanctuary of manicured lawns and vibrant greenhouses. I walked along the paved stone paths until I reached the Grand Central Fountain. DeAndre was already there, sitting on a sunlit bench. He was out of his dark hospital scrubs, wearing comfortable weekend clothes, looking 10 years younger than he had on the night of the charity gala. The dark circles of exhaustion and paralyzing stress had completely vanished from his eyes. He looked up and smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression of peace. Beside him, crouching near the edge of the fountain, was his 7-year-old son, Miles. Miles was laughing brightly, tossing small handfuls of birdseed to a flock of ducks gathered at the water edge. He was completely oblivious to the monstrous plans his mother had once harbored. DeAndre had shielded him entirely from the federal fallout. Brenda was just a distant memory now, a woman who had chosen extreme greed over her own flesh and blood, permanently removed from their daily reality by the thick concrete walls of a federal penitentiary. I sat down next to DeAndre, the warm sun washing over us. He handed me an iced coffee from the nearby cafe. "The hospital board officially finalized the budget this morning," DeAndre said, leaning back against the wooden slats of the bench. "The new pediatric trauma wing is fully funded and operational. We start receiving our first specialized airlift patients next Tuesday." "That is incredible," I replied, watching Miles successfully coax a brave duck to eat directly from his small palm. "The irony is perfect. It is poetic justice." DeAndre agreed, his deep voice resonating with quiet pride. "Patricia tried to use my medical license to wash dirty money, and she intended to leave me dead in a staged car crash. Instead, the $8 million the federal government seized from her offshore transfer on the night of the gala was legally donated straight to my department. We bought 6 new state-of-the-art emergency surgical suites with her cartel cash. She financed the very institution she tried to destroy." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, simply watching Miles play. There was no romantic tension between DeAndre and me. Our bond was vastly deeper and far more resilient than that. We were forged in the fires of a brutal, calculating betrayal. We were bound together by the survival of our true family. We had both lost the people we married to an intoxicating, lethal greed, but we had found an unbreakable alliance in each other. Ryan was gone, but his memory lived on in the absolute peace we had fought so hard to secure for his nephew. "Are you coming to the house for dinner tonight?" DeAndre asked, standing up to stretch his legs. "Miles wants to show you his new telescope. He has been talking about the lunar eclipse all week. I would not miss it, I promise," standing up beside him. DeAndre called out to Miles, who excitedly ran over, grabbing his father's hand. The boy looked up at me with bright, innocent eyes, completely safe and fiercely protected. They waved goodbye and walked down the garden path, an image of total resilience. I watched them disappear around a bend of flowering cherry trees, taking a deep breath of the fresh summer air. I had started this journey as a grieving, terrified widow, hunted in the dead of night, starved of all my resources, and framed as a deranged fugitive on the local news. Patricia and Brenda had tried to erase me from existence to protect their empire. Now they were nothing but federal inmate numbers, scrubbing concrete floors and fighting over allocated phone minutes, completely stripped of their wealth, their power, and their dignity. I owned the narrative. I controlled my own sprawling corporate empire. I had a family that could never be broken by greed. The trap I set had not just dismantled my enemies, it had completely liberated me. I turned and walked back toward my car, stepping confidently into a future where I possessed absolute power and total undeniable freedom.